Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the tranquil yet arduous world of a medieval fisherman, where casting nets by moonlight wasn't just a poetic choice, but often the only way to survive. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. Your day as a medieval fisherman kicks off in the pre-dawn gloom when the world is still half asleep, and even the roosters are hitting snooze. The air is crisp, carrying a whiff of salt and seaweed, and maybe just a hint of dread. Why dread, you ask? Well, let's be honest. Your job isn't exactly a joyride. It's more like a relentless cycle of hard labor and hoping today's catch will keep the bailiff off your back for another week. You grab your trusty net, the medieval equivalent of a Swiss Army knife for a fisherman, and prepare to hit the water. The tools of your trade are no frills. We're talking about the basics, nets woven from flax or hemp, and a wooden boat that's seen better days. Forget about GPS or sonar. Your best bet is a good sense of where the fish are likely to be, honed by years of experience and a bit of luck. In terms of evolution, the fishing gear hasn't changed much since the Romans were running the show. You've got your drag nets, cast nets, and maybe a few lines with hooks if you're feeling fancy. You've probably heard of the romantic notion of the lone fisherman battling the elements, but let's set the record straight. Fishing is a team sport. You've got your pals with you, and all of you are banking on today's haul to make it worth the back-breaking effort. As you row out onto the water, the rhythmic splash of your oars is almost meditative, but don't get too relaxed. The sea is as unpredictable as a medieval fair-weather friend. One moment, you're in calm waters, the next, you're fighting the waves like they owe you money. And speaking of money, let's talk economics. In the medieval world, fish isn't just food, it's currency. In England, for example, fish days mandated by the church mean demand is high. Prices fluctuate, but a good catch might fetch you a decent penny at the market. A salmon could bring in as much as 4 pence, which doesn't sound like much until you consider a laborer's daily wage is about the same. Fishing isn't just a job, it's a gamble. There's no guarantee you're coming back with a boatload of fish, or that you'll even make it back at all. The North Sea, for instance, is notorious for its storms. A sudden squall could turn your day into a scene from a medieval horror story. But you keep rowing, casting your net, and hoping for the best, because you've got mouths to feed and debts to pay. And hey, at least you're not plowing fields under a blazing sun or mucking out stables. Once you've got your catch, it's a race against time to get back to shore. The medieval fish market is a bustling affair, with merchants ready to haggle over prices like it's a sport. You need to sell your fish quickly before they start to smell worse than your boots, and that's saying something. A good fisherman knows his market. You've got to keep an eye on the competition and the trends. Are people going crazy for herring this week, or is it all about the eels? You can't afford to miss a beat. And then there's the social dance. You're not just dealing with merchants. You're navigating the complexities of medieval guilds. These are the guys who regulate everything, from who can fish where to what you can charge. They're like the medieval mafia, only with more rules and less violence, most of the time. If you're part of a guild, you've got some protection, but you've also got dues to pay and rules to follow. Step out of line, and you might find yourself out of a job faster than you can say, codpiece. Fishing might not have the glamour of nightly tournaments or the intrigue of court politics, but it's the backbone of the community. You're providing a staple food, and that's no small feat in a world where harvests can fail and famines are a very real threat. Plus, you're part of a rich tradition. Fishermen have been plying their trade since time immemorial, and will continue to do so long after you've hung up your nets for good. As you wrap up your day, you might allow yourself a moment of satisfaction. You've survived another day on the water, made a few coins, and perhaps even traded some fish for a mug of ale at the local tavern. Tomorrow, it all starts again with the same early hours and salty air. But for now, you can rest easy, knowing you've played your part in keeping the medieval world turning, one fish at a time. As you let out a satisfied sigh, thinking about that mug of ale waiting for you, let's take a moment to dive into the murky waters of medieval society. You see, your life as a fisherman isn't just about nets and boats. It's tangled up in the larger web of social and political structures, kind of like how your nets always seem to snare more seaweed than fish. First, let's talk about the feudal system, because no medieval story is complete without a nod to this notorious power hierarchy. Picture a pyramid where you're somewhere near the bottom, paddling away, while the lords and nobles sip their mead at the top. Feudalism in medieval Europe wasn't just a political structure. It was the medieval version of a corporate ladder, only without the stark options and corner offices. You, dear fisherman, are a tenant, not unlike a modern-day renter, but instead of paying with cash, you're shelling out a chunk of your catch to the local lord. And don't even think about casting your net in waters that belong to someone else. That's a one-way ticket to the stocks, and not the kind that pay dividends. Now let's pull the focus a little tighter. The church, ever the power player, has a surprising stake in your daily haul too. You might think of ecclesiastical influence as limited to sermons and soul-saving, but fish are a different kettle. The church mandates fish days, Fridays, Lent, and other holy days, to keep the meat cravings at bay, boosting demand for your slippery goods. In England, for instance, there were about 166 fish days a year. That's nearly half your calendar when everyone's eyes are on you, or at least on your latest catch. Imagine the Pope as your unlikely business partner, but instead of board meetings, it's all about divine decrees. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of fish as a divine mandate. The truth is, this ecclesiastical involvement isn't just about piety. It's a savvy economic maneuver. The church, possessing vast tracts of land and influence, benefits from these fish days as much as you do. It's a reminder that medieval life was less about simple living and more about strategic survival, where every fish you catch has its place in the great medieval marketplace. Speaking of survival, let's tackle the harsh realities of your supposedly idyllic, simple life. Romanticized tales paint you as a carefree spirit, living in harmony with nature. But here's the kicker. Nature isn't exactly a benevolent partner. Those storms we mentioned earlier, they're just as likely to send you to a watery grave as they are to fill your nets. And even on calm days, the sea can be an unforgiving mistress. Saltwater sores, hypothermia, and the ever-present danger of drowning are more your daily companions than any poetic muse. While poets might wax lyrically about the sea's beauty, you know better. It's a love-hate relationship built on necessity and sheer grit. And let's not forget the economic pressures. The romantic notion of freedom on the open sea quickly loses its charm when you're bound by debt. Whether it's the cost of maintaining your boat or paying your share to the Lord and Church, you're constantly treading water to keep your head afloat. Life, as a medieval fisherman, involves a ledger as much as it does a net, balancing your catch against the myriad dues and obligations that come with it. But despite these challenges, you're not alone. There's a community of fellow fishermen, and therein lies another layer of your social world. It's a tight-knit group, partly because you're all in the same leaky boat, so to speak. There's camaraderie, sure, but also competition. Who's got the best spot? Who's bringing in the biggest catch? It's a delicate dance of cooperation and rivalry, all set against the backdrop of survival. And while we're debunking myths, let's clear the air about the supposed simplicity of your diet. Sure, you've got access to fresh fish, but variety is another story. Fish, bread, and maybe a little ale if you're lucky. It's nutritious but monotonous. You might dream of the rich feasts of the nobility, but for now, it's fish pie again. Your diet is a reminder that simplicity isn't always the culinary utopia it's cracked up to be. So as you wrap up your day, aware of the forces that bind and shape your life, you realize that being a fisherman in the medieval world isn't just about casting nets and battling waves. It's about navigating a complex social and political landscape, where every fish caught is a small victory against a tide of obligations. From the feudal demands of your lord to the ecclesiastical edicts of the church, your life is a balancing act, one where every catch is not just a meal, but a means of survival in a world that's anything but simple. And as the sun sets over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the water, you take a moment to appreciate the quiet beauty of the sea. It's a rare pause in a life dictated by tides and time, a life that, despite its challenges, is uniquely your own. Tomorrow will bring its own set of challenges and catches, but for now, you can rest easy, knowing you've weathered another day in the unpredictable, exhilarating life of a medieval fisherman. But before you get too cozy with the idea of a cozy sea life, let's unravel the harsh truths lurking beneath the surface of those picturesque waves. Spoiler alert. The medieval sea wasn't a tranquil blue expanse filled with friendly fish just waiting to jump into your boat. Nope, it was more like a medieval gauntlet designed to test your mettle and leave you questioning your life choices. First up, let's talk about the weather. Medieval fishermen were at the mercy of Mother Nature's whims, and let's just say she wasn't always in a good mood. Forget the gentle breezes and golden sunsets. You were more likely to encounter bone-chilling winds and storms that could make even the sturdiest sailor consider a career change. Take the North Sea, for instance, a body of water known for its capricious temperament. One minute, you're rowing along under a cloudy sky, and the next, you're battling a tempest that seems hell-bent on turning your boat into driftwood. And if you're thinking modern weather forecasts could have helped, think again. Medieval meteorology was about as accurate as a game of medieval darts, blindfolded. You relied on old wives' tales and gut instincts, which, while charming, didn't exactly guarantee a safe voyage. And then there's the romantic notion of the sea as an endless bounty. While it's true that the oceans were teeming with more fish than today, medieval fishermen weren't exactly spoiled for choice. Overfishing was already starting to rear its ugly head, and certain species were becoming harder to find. Cod, once abundant in the North Atlantic, started to dwindle as demand soared. And let's not forget the environmental changes, like the Little Ice Age, which cooled the waters and shifted fish populations. The sea was less a mystical cornucopia and more a fickle buffet, where the menu was constantly changing, often without notice. As for the equipment, medieval fishermen weren't exactly equipped with the latest in fishing tech. Your boat was a simple wooden affair, prone to leaks and creaks. If you had sails, they were likely made of wool or linen, and your oars were more flintstones than jetsons. Nets were woven from flax or hemp, and they were as likely to snag on rocks as they were to catch fish. Forget about GPS or echo sounders. You relied on experience, intuition, and a whole lot of luck. And when things went wrong, there was no Coast Guard to call. You were your own rescue service, and often that meant praying for a miracle. Now, let's address the myth of the solitary fisherman serenely casting his net under a peaceful sky. In reality, fishing was often a communal effort. Sure, you might have had the occasional solo expedition, but more often than not, you were part of a crew. Teamwork was crucial, not just for hauling in the catch, but for survival. If a storm hit, you needed all hands on deck, literally, to keep the boat from capsizing. And when it came to divvying up the catch, you'd better hope everyone played fair. Nothing like a good old medieval squabble over who gets the biggest fish to test the bonds of friendship. Of course, all this toil and trouble wasn't just about putting food on the table. Fishing was also a high-stakes game of economics. With the church declaring nearly half the year as fish days, demand was high, but so was competition. You had to be savvy about where to sell your catch and how to haggle for the best price. Markets were bustling, noisy affairs, where merchants and fishermen negotiated over prices like it was an Olympic sport. And let's not forget the guilds, those medieval trade organizations that controlled everything from who could fish where to what you could charge. They were the gatekeepers of the fishing world, and if you wanted to stay in business, you played by their rules. Now, about that idyllic lifestyle, supposedly free from the cares of the feudal world. While you might not have been tethered to a plow, you were still subject to the whims of lords and landlords. Fishing rights were often a matter of property, and trespassers weren't taken lightly. Cast your net in the wrong waters, and you could find yourself in hot water, facing fines or worse. It was a delicate dance, balancing your own needs against the demands of those in power. And let's not even start on the church's cut, tithes and taxes that took a chunk out of your hard-earned profits. But despite the challenges, there was a certain camaraderie and resilience among fishermen. You were part of an age-old tradition, one that connected you to the rhythms of nature in a way few others could understand. The sea was both a harsh mistress and a bountiful provider, and navigating its challenges required skill, courage, and a touch of madness. Sure, the life of a medieval fisherman was filled with uncertainty, but it was also filled with moments of triumph and camaraderie, the salty air and the thrill of a good catch reminding you why you chose this life in the first place. So, the next time you hear tales of the romantic, carefree life of a medieval fisherman, take a moment to appreciate the reality behind the legend. It wasn't all sunny skies and peaceful waters. It was a hard-fought battle against the elements, economics, and the ever-present hand of feudal and ecclesiastical authority. But for those who braved the stormy seas and unpredictable markets, it was a life like no other, a testament to human resilience and the enduring allure of the open ocean. Tomorrow, as you prepare to set sail once more, remember that you're part of a legacy, a chapter in the long, storied history of those who dared to cast their nets into the unknown. As you prepare to set sail once more, let's wade into the bustling chaos of the medieval fish market, a place that was equal parts Wall Street, trading floor, and neighborhood watering hole. Picture this. It's not just about haggling over haddock or bartering for bream. No, the fish market is the medieval equivalent of Twitter, a swirling hub of news, gossip, and the occasional scandal, all wrapped up in the pungent aroma of fresh catch. These markets were where you got your daily dose of local happenings, whether it was the latest royal decree or who ran off with the blacksmith's daughter. Information moved faster here than a herring in a school, an invaluable resource in a time when printed news was as rare as a sober night at a feast. And let's not forget the political undercurrents. Markets were places where the whisperings of rebellion or alliances could be caught alongside the day's catch. The fishmonger you're dealing with might just be the medieval equivalent of a news anchor, albeit one with a dubious grasp on objectivity. Now, let's talk fishy politics, literally. The guilds, those medieval middlemen, were as notorious as modern-day lobbyists, only with more fish scales and fewer sound bites. They controlled licenses, enforced fishing laws, and set prices, which meant they were both gatekeepers and power brokers. Think of them as the original regulatory bodies, but with a penchant for fishy business. If you were in with the guild, you had certain privileges, but step out of line, and you might find yourself out of the market faster than a mackerel at high tide. But it wasn't all business and no play. The medieval calendar was peppered with festivals and religious observances that gave fishermen, and everyone else, a chance to let their hair down. These events were more than just holy days. They were the medieval version of a long weekend, complete with feasting, drinking, and a fair bit of revelry. And if you've ever heard the phrase, "Thank God it's Friday," you can thank the church for that. Friday was fish day, a time when meat was off the menu, and fish took center stage, making it the best day to be in the fish business. Speaking of religious observances, let's dive into Lent, that 40-day stretch of fish frenzy. While it was meant to be a time of penance, it was also a boon for business. With meat off the table, fish was the star of the show, and demand soared. Your catch of the day could fetch a handsome price, especially if you had something exotic or particularly tasty. Ever heard the phrase, "a fish out of water"? Well, during Lent, you wanted your fish firmly on the table, preferably alongside some nice, fresh bread and a flagon of ale. And here's a fun tidbit. During these religious seasons, the church wasn't just a spiritual authority. It was also a culinary influencer. With its vast lands and resources, the church was a major player in the fish game, owning fisheries and controlling supply. It's the kind of ecclesiastical oversight that makes you wonder if the Pope had a favorite recipe for fish stew. Now, let's debunk a myth or two about the idyllic communal life of medieval fishermen. Sure, you were part of a tight-knit community, but it wasn't all cumbears and campfire songs. Rivalries were as common as barnacles on a boat, and competition was fierce. Who caught the biggest fish, who had the best spot, and who was getting cozy with the guild? These were the pressing questions of the day. It was a delicate dance of cooperation and one-upmanship, a bit like medieval reality TV, but with more fish guts and fewer confessional interviews. Despite the rivalry, there was a sense of brotherhood among fishermen. You relied on each other not just for survival, but for sanity. After all, only a fellow fisherman truly understood the trials and tribulations of life at sea. The camaraderie was real, forged in shared hardships and the occasional shared ale. It's the kind of bond that only comes from battling the elements and the market together, one that modern office workers might recognize as the team-building exercise from hell. So, as you navigate the bustling fish markets and the ever-churning waters of medieval society, remember that life as a fisherman is as much about navigating social and political currents as it is about casting nets. Each marketplace transaction, each festival, each holy day adds another layer to the tapestry of your life, weaving together the disparate threads of commerce, community, and culture. And while the sea may be your stage, the true drama unfolds in the lively, unpredictable world of human interaction. As you sail into tomorrow, keep your eyes on the horizon and your ears open at the market. After all, the life of a medieval fisherman is not just about the fish you catch, but the stories you share and the legacy you leave behind. Each cast of the net is a gamble, each sail a small victory, and each festival a reminder of the rhythm of life. So, take a deep breath of that salty air, and prepare to dive once more into the fascinating, tumultuous, and endlessly captivating world of medieval fishing. As you sail into tomorrow, keep your eyes on the horizon and your ears open at the market. After all, the life of a medieval fisherman is not just about the fish you catch, but the stories you share and the legacy you leave behind. Each cast of the net is a gamble, each sail a small victory, and each festival a reminder of the rhythm of life. So, take a deep breath of that salty air and prepare to dive once more into the fascinating, tumultuous, and endlessly captivating world of medieval fishing. Now, let's reel in the net of time and see what we've caught, a mixed bag of lessons from the life of a medieval fisherman. Spoiler alert, it's a bit more complex than the romantic notion of a simple life by the sea. While knights were charging into battle and kings were plotting their next political gambit, you were out there, fighting your own battles against the capricious sea and the ever-demanding market. And those struggles, they echo into the modern world more than you might think. First, let's talk economics. Back then, a fisherman's livelihood depended heavily on the church calendar, which dictated nearly half the year as fish days. Today, it's less about holy mandates and more about global demand, but the principle remains. Fish as a commodity. The medieval fisherman might have sold his catch for pennies, but those pennies were crucial in a world where a loaf of bread could cost 1 to 2 pence. Fast forward to today, and fish are still big business, with the global seafood market valued at over $159 billion in 2021. Whether you're trading in shillings or Bitcoin, it's clear that fish continue to be a staple of economic exchange, a testament to their enduring value. Socially, not much has changed. Just like you had to deal with guilds and their sometimes overbearing regulations, modern fishermen contend with quotas, licenses, and sustainability measures. While medieval guilds were the original gatekeepers, today's regulatory bodies like the Marine Stewardship Council wield similar power, dictating what, where, and how much you can catch. The names have changed, but the game, not so much. And then there's the environmental aspect. Back in the day, overfishing was starting to become an issue, with certain species becoming scarce due to high demand. The Little Ice Age shifted fish populations, making the sea an unpredictable provider. Today, climate change and overfishing continue to pose significant threats. We're no longer dealing with the Little Ice Age, but with warming oceans and melting ice caps, making sustainable fishing practices more critical than ever. The medieval fisherman might not have known the term sustainability, but the struggle to balance supply and demand is an age-old challenge. So, was it really the simple life, or just another cog in the medieval machine? On the surface, the life of a fisherman might seem idyllic, with its open waters and freedom from the rigid constraints of agricultural labor. But beneath the waves lies a different story, one of economic uncertainty, social obligations, and environmental challenges. The romantic notion of simplicity is appealing, but it's a bit like looking at a fish through a frosted pane of glass. You see the outline but miss the details. Yet there's something to be said for the resilience and camaraderie that defined this life. Despite the hardships, or perhaps because of them, fishermen forged strong bonds, creating communities that were as tight-knit as the nets they cast. It's this sense of community, of shared purpose and collective struggle, that remains a defining feature of fishing culture today. Whether you're hauling in a catch off the coast of medieval England or the shores of modern-day Maine, the spirit of the fisherman endures, an unbroken thread connecting past and present. As we wrap up this exploration of medieval fishing, it's clear that while the tools and technologies may have evolved, the essence of the trade remains remarkably consistent. It's a life dictated by tides and time, by market demands and environmental constraints, and above all, by the unwavering human drive to provide. So next time you enjoy a plate of fish and chips or savor a delicate sushi roll, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of those early fishermen. They were more than just providers of sustenance. They were pioneers navigating the uncertain waters of economic and environmental change, a testament to human adaptability and resilience. In the end, the life of a medieval fisherman was anything but simple. It was a complex tapestry woven from the threads of economic necessity, social structures, and environmental realities. Each day was a new chapter in an ongoing story of survival and adaptation, a story that continues to unfold in the modern world. As the sun sets on this chapter, remember that the legacy of the medieval fisherman is one of perseverance and ingenuity, a reminder that even the humblest of professions can leave a lasting impact on the world. So here's to the fishermen, past and present, who brave the seas and weather the storms, casting their nets into the unknown and bringing home the catch that sustains us all. You roll over in your straw-stuffed mattress, the early morning chill nipping at your nose like an overzealous puppy. It's 4 a.m., and while most of the 14th century is still blissfully asleep, you're wrestling with the kind of wake-up call that doesn't come with a snooze button. Why, you ask? Because you're a medieval falconer, and your feathery, high-maintenance companions demand breakfast before the sun has even considered rising. Now, before you start thinking this gig is all about strutting around like a noble with a bird on your arm, let's dive into the nitty-gritty. Sure, falconry carried a whiff of prestige, but don't let that fool you into picturing yourself as some kind of medieval influencer. The reality, you're more of a glorified bird nanny with a side of social climbing. Let's talk economics, because owning a falcon wasn't just a hobby, it was an investment. You could snag a run-of-the-mill hawk for a few shillings, but if you wanted a top-tier gyrfalcon, you're looking at prices that could rival the GDP of a small village. We're talking entire estates or the annual income of a well-off merchant. It's like the medieval equivalent of buying a sports car, and just like that shiny Ferrari, your falcon needs upkeep, training, and constant attention. So, you're up before dawn, and while your bird's breakfast might involve ripping into a freshly caught rabbit, yours probably consists of whatever gruel you can scrape together. The glamorous life of a falconer, right? Your days are spent in the field, training your bird to respond to your every signal. It's a delicate dance, and one that requires patience, precision, and a level of bird whispering that would make Dr. Dolittle jealous. But it's not just about you and your bird. Oh no, you've got patrons to keep happy. Nobles and kings who expect you to deliver results, often with a side of political maneuvering. You're not just managing a bird, you're managing egos. Keeping a noble patron pleased could mean the difference between living comfortably or finding yourself tossed out on your feathered rear. And let's not forget the social pecking order. Falconry might have been a pastime of the nobility, but as the person doing the dirty work, you're not exactly welcomed into the inner circle. You're rubbing shoulders with the elite without ever really being one of them. It's like being backstage at a rock concert, but never getting to step into the spotlight. Now, what about those myths of falconry as a noble sport? Sure, there's an element of truth. Falconry was indeed a symbol of status and sophistication. Kings like Frederick Roman II of Hohenstaufen wrote entire treatises on the art, but that doesn't mean you're living a life of luxury. It's more like being the roadie to a rock star. You're crucial, but don't expect to be signing autographs anytime soon. You see, falconry wasn't just a pastime. It was a microcosm of medieval society. It was about power, prestige, and the constant struggle to maintain both. Your falcon was a status symbol, and your skills were your ticket to a better life, or at least to avoiding the breadline. But the harsh truth is, falconry was hard work. Training these birds was no walk in the park. It was days of repetitive drills, fostering trust, and hoping your prized bird didn't decide to fly off into the sunset with your future. And while the romantic idea of a falcon perched elegantly on your arm is appealing, in reality, you're more likely to be dealing with a bird that smells like it's been bathing in roadkill. So next time you hear about the noble art of falconry, remember the early mornings, the economic juggling, and the endless politicking. It wasn't all pageantry and prestige. It was a daily grind. And as you stand there, eyes barely open, trying to coax your hawk into another day of training, you might just find yourself yearning for a simpler life, one where breakfast doesn't come with talons. You might be dreaming of a simpler life, but here you are, juggling the medieval equivalent of a diva bird with a penchant for roadkill. Welcome to the glamorous world of falcon care, where your clients are feathered, picky, and a tad unpredictable. Think of your falcon as a medieval celebrity. It's got a diet more particular than your vegan cousin at a barbecue. These birds aren't just pecking at any old scraps. No, they demand the medieval version of fine dining. Freshly caught game. Thank you very much. Imagine trying to keep a bird of prey satisfied when its idea of a snack is a whole rabbit or a pigeon. And if you thought your local grocery store ran out of essentials quickly, try sourcing fresh game in the dead of winter. While you're hunting for your bird's breakfast, you might want to brush up on your veterinary skills. You see, medieval falconry wasn't just about feeding and flying. It was also about keeping your feathered investment in peak condition. Let's remember that falcons are essentially athletes with wings, and like any top-tier athlete, they require meticulous care. But before you start picturing yourself as some kind of medieval doctor, Doolittle, let's talk about the reality of veterinary practices back then. If medieval falcon care had a motto, it might be, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." With treatments that make modern animal rights activists shudder, falconers often resorted to concoctions of herbs and minerals, or sometimes even bloodletting, to treat their birds. Yeah, bloodletting, because nothing says healthy bird like a bit of medieval hemoglobin removal. Now, let's get into the tools of the trade, because falconry isn't all about a bird and its handler having a Kodak moment. Enter the hood and jesses, your must-have accessories for bird management. The hood, a tiny leather cap, is used to keep the bird calm. A calm bird is a happy bird, or at least one that isn't trying to claw your face off. The jesses, on the other hand, are leather straps that function like a medieval leash, giving you some semblance of control over your sky-high pet. But don't be fooled. Wielding these tools requires the dexterity of a magician and the patience of a saint. One slip, and your bird is off like a medieval Ferrari with wings, potentially taking your livelihood along for the ride. And let's not forget the constant vigilance required on your part. Yes, falconers had to be on high alert, not just for the sake of their birds, but to protect them from potential predators or thieves. Falcons were valuable, remember. Losing one wasn't just a personal tragedy. It could send you spiraling into financial ruin. Picture this. You're out in the field, keeping one eye on your bird and the other on the horizon for anything that might swoop in and snatch it. It's like living in a medieval heist movie where you're the security guard, the detective, and the potential victim, all rolled into one. And let's talk droppings, because nothing says romantic medieval sport like scraping bird poop off your tunic. Falcon droppings, or mute, are part and parcel of the job. You'd think dealing with a bit of poop would be no big deal, but these aren't your average bird droppings. They're a potent mixture that can stain clothing and make your living quarters smell like a particularly unkempt aviary. Welcome to the not-so-glamorous side of falconry, where the stench is constant and the cleaning never-ending. So there you are, surrounded by all the accoutrements of falconry, juggling the demands of a bird that's as high maintenance as it is majestic. The truth is, falconry was a status symbol, sure, but it was also a full-time job that required an iron will and an iron stomach. Next time you see a medieval painting of a noble with a hawk on their wrist, remember the falconer behind the scenes, up at the crack of dawn, armed with a hood, jesses, and a bucket for the droppings, doing the dirty work to keep that noble status in flight. And maybe, just maybe, you'll appreciate the sheer tenacity required to make falconry look effortless when it was anything but. So, while your day-to-day might involve more bird poop than you'd ever care to admit, the real test of your falconry prowess is about to unfold in the high-stakes theater of a medieval hunt. Picture this. It's dawn. The mist hangs in the air like a bad metaphor, and you're gearing up for a day in the great outdoors with the local aristocracy, who are armed and often alarmingly eager to use their weapons. Your role, to ensure the hunt proceeds smoothly, which, let's be honest, is a bit like being the responsible adult on a school trip where everyone's packing crossbows. Now, don't be fooled into thinking you're the star of this show. In the elaborate hierarchy of a medieval hunting party, you're more like the backstage crew, essential, but invisible if everything goes according to plan. You see, hunts were less about catching dinner and more about flexing social muscles. They were the medieval equivalent of a high-profile networking event, and the falconer's role was to ensure the noble's prized bird didn't embarrass them in front of their peers. Imagine the pressure. One wrong move, and your lord's gyrfalcon, worth more than a small castle, could decide to take an impromptu vacation to the next county, leaving you to explain why his social standing just took a nosedive. And speaking of nosedives, let's dive into the social dynamics at play. You're mingling with knights, barons, maybe even the Archduke, who are as temperamental as they are titled. These hunts could include a dozen or more people, each with their own entourage, and every one of them has an ego the size of a medieval cathedral. Your job is to navigate through this forest of egos, ensuring your bird performs flawlessly while you remain practically invisible. Because let's face it, no one wants to hear from the help unless something's gone terribly wrong. But oh, the tales of hunts going hilariously awry. Take, for instance, the infamous hunting party of King John of England in the early 13th century, where his falcon decided that chasing a rabbit was far more exciting than sticking to the plan. The chase ended with the noble party scrambling across hedges and streams, trying not to lose their dignity or their bird. Or how about that time in 1390, when the Duke of York had to dodge an overzealous falcon that mistook his shiny helmet for prey? The moral of the story: in medieval falconry, the line between triumph and disaster was as thin as a feather. The societal perception of falconry wasn't just about the glamour of the hunt, though it must be said, the appeal was significant. Yes, falconry was seen as a noble pursuit, but the reality was more nuanced. A 14th century manuscript, the Book of St. Albans, lavishly described falconry as a gentleman's sport, but it failed to mention the reality of dealing with birds that have all the loyalty of a fair-weather friend. You could be the best falconer in Christendom, but if your bird decided to take a day off, well, you better have a good excuse ready. Economically speaking, the stakes were high. Losing a bird could set you back enough to ruin you financially, not to mention the social consequences. Nobles viewed their falcons as extensions of their own prestige. A falcon failure could mean a falconer failure, and medieval nobles weren't exactly known for their forgiving nature. You'd better hope you've got the charm of a court jester to smooth things over, or else you might find yourself at the wrong end of your lord's displeasure. And remember, this is a time when displeasure could be expressed by sending you to the stocks, or worse. But let's not get too bogged down in the doom and gloom. The allure of falconry was undeniable. It was a chance for the nobility to demonstrate their mastery over nature, their wealth, and their refined tastes. And as the falconer, you were the unsung hero behind this display of power and prestige. It might not have been glamorous, but it was a position of influence. You had the ear of the elite, if only because they needed you to keep their status symbols airborne and impressive. In the grand tapestry of medieval society, you were a crucial thread, weaving together the lives of the highborn with the natural world. It was a dance of diplomacy and dexterity, a balancing act where one misstep could send everything tumbling. You learned quickly to read the room, or the field, as it were, and anticipate the whims of your patrons. A successful hunt was as much about managing people as it was about managing birds, and your ability to do both could mean the difference between a successful career and an early retirement from life itself. So, as you stand there amidst the clamor of horses and hounds, the air thick with the smell of leather and ambition, you might wonder if this life is for you. But then, as your falcon returns from a successful flight, you see the glint of respect in your lord's eye, and for a moment, the world seems right. You're reminded that in this medieval dance of power and prestige, you're not just a player, you're the conductor, orchestrating a symphony of feathers and fortune. Just try not to get too attached to the idea of a relaxing day out. Remember, you're only one dive-bombing falcon away from chaos. So, just when you're basking in the fleeting glory of your falcon's triumphant return, let's take a step back and look at how falconry became the medieval equivalent of a high-end yacht club membership across Europe and the Middle East. This wasn't just about a bird on your arm. It was a bona fide status symbol, the kind of thing you'd brag about over goblets of mead at the medieval equivalent of a cocktail party. Now, we all know that the Middle Ages had its fair share of social climbing, and falconry was one of those golden ladders. This wasn't just about having a cool hobby. It was a gateway to rubbing elbows with the elite. A gyrfalcon on your wrist was like having a limited edition sports car parked in your medieval driveway. And just like that sports car, it told the world, I have arrived. But of course, not just anyone could roll up with a bird of prey. Oh no, there were legal hoops to jump through that would make today's bureaucracy look like a walk in the park. In England, for instance, the game laws dictated who could own what kind of bird. If you were a serf eyeing a peregrine falcon, forget it. These laws were as rigid as a knight's armor, ensuring that only the well-heeled could indulge in such feathery frivolities. Kings got to flaunt their gyrfalcons, barons could settle for buzzards, and peasants, well, they got to watch from afar. Why all these restrictions, you ask? Because falconry was a microcosm of the feudal order, reinforcing the hierarchy where everyone knew their place. The king was the top falcon, swooping over his domain, while the rest of the social birds flapped about in their assigned zones. It was all about control, prestige, and maintaining the medieval pecking order. But let's not gloss over the glamour this sport held. From the Persian Empire to the courts of the European nobility, falconry was steeped in allure. In the Middle East, falconry was more than a pastime. It was a respected art form, deeply embedded in the culture. The Moguls, for instance, were notorious for their ornately embroidered falconry gloves and elaborate training techniques that would make a drill sergeant blush. It was about mastery over nature, a demonstration of intellect and refinement. Yet, amid all this gilded pageantry, art and literature swooped in to add their own romantic spin. Who could resist the allure of a medieval tapestry depicting a noble lady, a falcon perched elegantly, ready to dive into the hunt? And let's not forget the troubadours singing about falconry as the sport of kings and lovers, weaving tales that were as much fantasy as they were fact. The reality, however, was often less poetic and more about mud, sweat, and feathers. This is where the myths really took flight. Paintings from the Renaissance onward depict falconry as a serene, almost spiritual pursuit, a communion between human and bird. But what they conveniently left out were the countless hours spent trudging through fields. The occasional bird that decided freedom was preferable to returning to a gloved hand, and the less than pleasant aroma of bird droppings that was your constant companion. And let's not get started on the idea that falconry was all about noble ladies delicately handling these birds. In reality, training a raptor required a kind of grit that didn't exactly fit the genteel mold. It was more about shoveling guts than receiving roses, let me tell you. These romantic images, though, are sticky. They persist because they tap into our love for the idyllic, the notion that the past was somehow more refined. But dig a little deeper, and you find that falconry was as much about survival and social strategy as it was about elegance. It was a sport for the ruling classes who used it as a symbol of their dominance over both nature and the social order. The persistence of these myths tells us something about human nature, too. We love a good story, even if it glosses over the gritty details. Falconry's glamorous reputation has endured because it reflects our own fantasies of power and prestige, a reminder that sometimes we prefer the legend to the ledger. So, while today's falconry enthusiasts might still revel in the sport's rich history, they can probably do without the medieval realities of plague, poverty, and precarious social standing. And that's the crux of it. The myth of the noble falconer is a comforting fiction, a way to romanticize a past that was, in truth, as much about status anxiety as it was about nature's majesty. As we wrap our heads around this feathered history, let's not forget that the reality was often more down-to-earth and less Instagrammable than those illuminated manuscripts would have you believe. But isn't it fascinating how we humans have always had a knack for spinning a good yarn, even when living with the birds and the mud? So next time you see a medieval painting of a noble with a hawk, remember that behind that elegant image was a falconer, likely tired and smelling of something best left unmentioned, just trying to keep his lord's reputation and his own head intact. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see a little bit of yourself in those myths, longing for a moment of splendor amidst the everyday grind. As we dig deeper into this tale, we'll explore more of the cultural and economic threads that made falconry the complex, captivating sport it was. Just keep your eyes on the horizon, because there's more adventure and myth-busting yet to come. So, as we dig deeper into this tale, we'll explore more of the cultural and economic threads that made falconry the complex, captivating sport it was. Just keep your eyes on the horizon, because there's more adventure and myth-busting yet to come. But let's shift gears and talk about how falconry spreads its wings beyond the medieval era, evolving through the ages and leaving its talon marks on history. As the medieval world transitioned into the Renaissance, the winds of change were blowing faster than a peregrine on the hunt. Technological advances, like gunpowder and firearms, began to revolutionize hunting. Suddenly, you didn't need a falcon to catch dinner. A musket could do the job with a lot less fuss, and a whole lot fewer feathers. This shift wasn't just about efficiency. It was about the democratization of hunting. Guns could be used by anyone with a steady aim and a bit of practice, breaking down the social barriers that once made falconry the exclusive domain of the elite. The Industrial Revolution further clipped the wings of falconry's necessity. As societies became more urbanized, need for hunting as a means of sustenance dwindled. People moved to cities, and the sprawling estates of yore were replaced by factories and smokestacks. Who needed a hawk when you could buy a chicken at the local market? Falconry, once a symbol of power and prestige, was relegated to the realms of nostalgia and hobbyists. But don't count falconry out just yet. Like a phoenix rising from the ashes, the art of falconry has experienced a resurgence in modern times. Today, it thrives as a sport and an art form, a nod to the past in a world that often feels too fast-paced for its own good. This comeback isn't just about reliving the glory days of knights and nobles. It's about preserving a tradition that connects us to nature and to each other. Modern falconers are a dedicated bunch, often more passionate about conservation than conquest. The International Association for Falconry and Conservation of Birds of Prey, founded in 1968, has members from over 90 countries. They work tirelessly to protect raptor species and their habitats, ensuring that these magnificent birds continue to grace our skies. Talk about a legacy, from medieval status symbol to modern-day conservation icon. And let's not forget the legislation. Countries like the United States have strict laws governing falconry, requiring potential falconers to apprentice for years, pass rigorous exams, and maintain detailed logs of their birds' care and activities. It's a commitment that rivals any medieval apprenticeship, ensuring that only the truly dedicated can call themselves falconers. So next time you see someone with a falcon, remember, they've put in the work. Yet, despite this modern revival, the myths of medieval falconry persist. It's easy to get swept up in the romance of a falcon perched on a noble's arm, but understanding the gritty realities of historical falconry is crucial. The dedication, skill, and sheer effort required to maintain these birds offer a stark contrast to the polished images we often see in art and literature. Recognizing the blood, sweat, and droppings, yes, the droppings, that went into this practice helps us appreciate the true artistry behind it. And there's something deeply human about our tendency to romanticize the past. We create legends to escape the mundane, to find beauty in the struggle. The myth of the noble falconer serves as a reminder of our own desires for power, prestige, and connection to the natural world. But it's also a cautionary tale, showing us that the path to glory is often paved with hard work and sacrifice, not just fairy tales and feathers. So, as we wrap up this flight through history, let's tip our hats to those medieval falconers who balanced on the knife's edge of survival, who mastered the delicate dance between man and bird. Their legacy is a reminder of the endurance of human ingenuity and the timeless allure of nature. Whether you're a history buff or a bird enthusiast, the story of falconry offers a window into a world that was as complex and captivating as the raptors themselves. Now, as you close this chapter on history, perhaps you'll find a newfound appreciation for those who walked the fields before us, falcons in tow, shaping the course of history one hunt at a time. And who knows, you might even be inspired to pick up a falconry glove yourself, joining a tradition that soars high above the ordinary, reminding us all of the beauty and complexity of life itself. Nestled between the mountains and deserts, the Sogdian Empire was like the ancient world's version of a pop-up shop, but with a lot more camels and no Wi-Fi. In what is today Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, the Sogdians built a civilization that was more about the hustle than the muscle. Their territory straddled the Silk Road, that ancient superhighway of trade and culture, and they made sure every caravan passing through paid the toll, metaphorically speaking. If you think being a middleman is a modern gig, think again. The Sogdians were the original deal-makers, negotiating trade agreements with the kind of finesse that would make Wall Street brokers weep into their spreadsheets. The Sogdians were masters of commerce, trading everything from silk to spices, and they didn't stop there. Ideas, religions, and technologies passed through their hands like a hot potato, and they were more than happy to facilitate the exchange for a price. Think of them as the FedEx of the ancient world, but without the tracking numbers. While Rome had its legions and China its great walls, the Sogdians had their networks. An invisible empire built on the art of the deal long before that phrase was a book title. This wasn't just about moving goods from point A to point B. The Sogdians were cultural conduits, connecting east and west in a way that was both profitable and transformative. They spoke multiple languages, understood different cultures, and had a knack for diplomacy that would make any modern-day ambassador envious. They were polyglots at a time when most people were lucky if they could read in their own language. In fact, Sogdian was the lingua franca of the Silk Road, much like English is today in international business. It was the language you needed to know if you wanted to get anywhere, or more accurately, if you wanted your goods to get anywhere. Their geographical location wasn't just a happy accident, it was the reason they thrived. The Sogdian Empire found itself in the Goldilocks zone of ancient trade routes, not too far east, not too far west, but just right for channeling the flow of goods and wealth. They capitalized on this position with the kind of savvy that would make a venture capitalist proud. The harsh reality, though, was that their success depended on a delicate balance of power between larger empires like Persia and China. They had to keep these gigantic neighbors happy, much like a small business trying to survive next to a Walmart. Now, before you get carried away with visions of silk-clad merchants lounging in opulent tents, let's bust a few myths. Life in the Sogdian Empire wasn't all glamour and luxury. Sure, there were riches to be had, but there were also bandits, treacherous mountain passes, and the ever-present threat of political upheaval. And while they didn't have to deal with the challenges of overnight delivery, they faced their own set of logistical nightmares, from sandstorms to stampeding yaks. The Sogdians were also adept at spreading ideas as well as goods. They played a crucial role in the dissemination of Buddhism into China, for example. No small feat, considering the cultural and linguistic barriers involved. They didn't just peddle wares. They were cultural brokers, helping to shape the philosophies and religions that would define entire civilizations. In a way, they were the original influencers, shaping trends thousands of years before Instagram. One of the more surprising elements of their story is just how cosmopolitan their cities were. Places like Samarkand and Bukhara were melting parts of cultures and ethnicities, buzzing with activity and vibrant with diversity. Imagine bustling markets where you could hear a dozen languages in a single square, with merchants hawking wares from as far away as Rome and China. It was a level of globalization that would put our current world to shame, except without the carbon footprint. In the end, the Sogdian Empire was an empire without borders. Their influence stretched far beyond their modest geographic confines, reaching into the very fabric of the Silk Road itself. They may not have left behind grand monuments or epic tales of conquest, but their legacy is woven into the tapestry of history, a testament to the power of trade, negotiation, and cultural exchange. And if you ever find yourself lamenting the complexities of modern commerce, just remember, the Sogdians did it first, and they did it with style. While their empire may have lacked grand monuments, the Sogdians built something arguably more enduring, an economic powerhouse that thrived on the art of the deal. You see, in the Sogdian world, trade wasn't just an occupation. It was practically a national sport, complete with its own set of rules and a playbook that would make any modern entrepreneur sit up and take notes. First off, let's talk about the Sogdian language, which was basically the Rosetta Stone of the Silk Road. If you wanted to do business in Central Asia, you spoke Sogdian, period. It was the lingua franca that made sure your silk made it from China to Rome without a hitch. Or at least, that was the plan. This wasn't just about fluent conversation. It was about fluent commerce. The Sogdians were polyglots par excellence, speaking multiple languages with the ease of a diplomat at a UN meeting. Their linguistic prowess was a key ingredient in their secret sauce for success, helping them navigate trade deals that span continents. Now, you might be wondering, how did they manage to pull off this global hustle without a centralized government? The Sogdians were like the freelancers of the ancient world, operating through loosely connected city-states such as Samarkand and Bukhara. These hubs were strategically located along the Silk Road, acting as vital waypoints in this 3 0,000-mile network of trade. It was less about top-down control and more about a decentralized web of merchants and middlemen, each with an eye on the prize. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality of Sogdian trade was less glamorous than the opulent caravans of Hollywood lore. Imagine transporting goods over treacherous mountain passes and through hostile deserts, with only a camel and the stars to guide you. And then there were the costs, financial and otherwise. Hiring a caravan could set you back quite a bit, and that was before you factored in the bribes to local warlords and the occasional donation to bandits who fancied themselves as toll collectors. The Sogdians understood that the real cost of doing business was measured in risk as much as in silver coins. Their business practices were as clever as they were pragmatic. They operated with the kind of nimbleness that would make a Silicon Valley startup envious. Need to pivot because a route is blocked by snow? No problem. Sogdians would simply reroute through an alternate path, their adaptability ensuring that the flow of goods never stopped. They were the original masters of supply chain management long before anyone coined the term. And speaking of costs, let's not forget the human toll. Being a Sogdian merchant wasn't just a job, it was a lifestyle, and at times, a perilous one. Merchants faced everything from dysentery to double-crossing partners, and yet they persevered. Because in a world where your wealth depended on the whims of weather, politics, and the occasional plague, resilience wasn't just desirable, it was essential. In sum, the Sogdian economy was a marvel of ancient logistics and linguistic dexterity, all spun together in a web that reached far and wide. It was an empire without borders, a tapestry of trade that wove together cultures, languages, and economies in a complex dance that was as fragile as it was grand. Yet, the Sogdians made it work, turning the seemingly impossible into the everyday. And while they didn't have the luxury of modern conveniences, they managed to carve out a niche that left a lasting impact on the ancient world. So next time you grumble about a delayed Amazon package, just remember, the Sogdians did it first, and they did it against odds that would make your head spin. But if you think the Sogdians were just about trade and commerce, buckle up, because their political life was a whole different ballgame. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Sogdian politics, where intrigue met ingenuity, and alliances were as fluid as the sands of the Kaiselkum Desert. Imagine a political landscape where the phrase office politics involved actual thrones, and shifting alliances were the norm. Welcome to the Sogdian Empire, where the political structure was as decentralized as a modern cryptocurrency. Unlike the Roman Empire, with its well-defined hierarchy, the Sogdians operated through a network of city-states. Think of places like Samarkand as the Silicon Valley of the ancient world, hubs of innovation, commerce, and yes, political maneuvering. Each city-state had its own local ruler, or Ikshid, and while they might have shared a general cultural identity, don't be fooled into thinking they were all on the same page. The Sogdian political structure was more like a patchwork quilt than a unified tapestry. The Ikshids, those local rulers, were the kings of their respective hills, each managing their domain with the autonomy of a startup CEO. They answered to no central authority, which sounds great until you remember that with great power comes great responsibility and a ton of backroom deals. These rulers were experts at playing both ends against the middle. If a Persian Empire envoy came knocking, they'd roll out the red carpet. If a Chinese delegation showed up next, they'd do the same, switching allegiances faster than you can say, Silk Road. You might be tempted to believe that this balancing act was a walk in the park, but let's bust that myth. Maintaining independence in the shadow of larger empires was like walking a tightrope over a pit of snakes. The Sogdians had to navigate complex relationships with their more powerful neighbors, the Persians and the Chinese, all while keeping local rivalries in check. It was a high-stakes game of chess, and the pieces were constantly in motion. Now, let's tackle the idea of Sogdian religion, which was as diverse as their political alliances. These folks were the ultimate spiritual chameleons. Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Nestorian Christianity, and Manichaeism all found a home in Sogdian society, coexisting with a harmony that would make modern interfaith dialogues look like a kindergarten squabble. The Sogdians weren't just tolerant, they were opportunistic, adopting and adapting religious practices to suit the political climate of the day. If a neighboring empire favored a particular faith, You can bet the Sogdians would suddenly find that faith particularly appealing. But this wasn't just about religious syncretism for the sake of diplomacy. The Sogdians were genuinely invested in these spiritual traditions, using them to build bridges across cultures and expand their networks. They didn't just believe in the gods, they believed in the power of belief as a tool for survival and growth. And in a world where the divine often dictated the temporal, that was a savvy move. Let's not forget the strategic alliances, which were as crucial as the goods they traded. The Sogdians had a knack for knowing when to cozy up to a powerful ally and when to distance themselves, an instinct that would make any seasoned diplomat nod in approval. They allied themselves with whoever held the power balance at any given time, which often meant pledging loyalty to both the Persians and the Chinese, sometimes simultaneously. This was double-dealing at its finest, and it was essential for their survival. Samarkand, the crown jewel of Sogdian cities, was a prime example of this diplomatic dance. It was here that Persian and Chinese influences collided and coalesced. While the Sogdians adopted Persian administrative practices, they also welcomed Chinese cultural elements, creating a unique blend that was distinctly their own. It's like they threw a cultural potluck, and everyone brought their best dish. Except in this case, the dishes were entire civilizations. As much as we might romanticize these cosmopolitan hubs, life wasn't just a series of grand banquets and cultural exchanges. Beneath the glittering exterior lurked a gritty reality. Political instability was a constant threat, and city-states like Samarkand had to contend with internal power struggles and external pressures. The local rulers were always on the lookout for the next uprising or invasion, which meant that loyalty was often as fleeting as the desert wind. The Sogdians were also adept at playing the long game. They understood that while power dynamics shifted with alarming regularity, the trade routes remained. So, they invested in relationships, not just with empires, but with other merchant communities. It was like having a Rolodex of contacts from Rome to China, and they knew how to leverage these connections to their advantage. In the end, the Sogdian political landscape was as intricate as their trade networks, a complex web of alliances, religions, and city-states that defied easy categorization. They were the ultimate pragmatists, using their wits and charm to navigate a world where the only constant was change. And while their empire may not have been built on the backs of soldiers or the whims of emperors, it was sustained by a deep understanding of human nature and the delicate dance of diplomacy. As we peel back the layers of the Sogdian political and social structure, it's clear that their legacy is one of adaptability and resilience. They thrived in a world where the rules were never set in stone, proving that sometimes the best way to survive is to embrace the chaos and dance to the tune of changing times. So, stay tuned, because the story of the Sogdians is far from over. There's more intrigue, trade, and cultural exchange to uncover as we continue our journey along the ancient Silk Road. Let's dive deeper into the cultural kaleidoscope that was the Sogdian Empire, a society that didn't just borrow elements from other civilizations, but practically ran a cultural adoption agency. The Sogdians were the ultimate cultural magpies, picking up shiny new ideas and art forms from every civilization they encountered, and then giving them a twist that was uniquely their own. If you think of culture as a buffet, the Sogdians were those people who pile their plates high, mix it all up, and somehow make it work. Take their art, for example. The Sogdians didn't just dabble in aesthetics, they went full-blown fusion. Their murals, found in places like Afrasiab near Samarkand, are a testament to this eclectic mix. These frescoes depict a world where Persian dignitaries, Chinese bureaucrats, and local deities all rub shoulders in vibrant, swirling colors. It was like a social media feed before hashtags, capturing a snapshot of a multicultural society in all its bustling glory. And let's not forget their architecture, a tangible testament to their global influences. The Sogdians were the Frank Lloyd Wrights of their time, taking architectural cues from the Persians, Indians, Chinese, and even the Greeks. Their cities featured ziggurats that would make Babylonian architects nod in approval and intricately carved stone that echoed Persian artistry. But they weren't just about borrowing, they were about blending. Each Sogdian city was a mashup of styles, a testament to their ability to absorb influences and yet maintain an identity. Picture a skyline that mixes the majestic with the practical, a cityscape that whispered secrets of distant lands while standing firmly rooted in its Central Asian soil. Now, if you're picturing lavish palaces and sprawling estates, let's bust that myth right now. The Sogdian cities weren't endless rows of opulence. They were functional, bustling hubs of trade and interaction. Their architecture was as much about utility as it was about style. Think of it as the ancient version of IKEA, practical, efficient, but with a flair for the dramatic. The Sogdians also left their mark on the cultures they traded with, notably the Chinese and Persians. In China, they were the cultural bridge that helped introduce Buddhism, effectively planting the seeds of a religious revolution. They didn't just roll in with a few scrolls and call it a day. They actively participated in the translation and dissemination of Buddhist texts. It was like the Sogdians were running the ancient world's equivalent of a publishing house, churning out bestsellers that would shape spiritual landscapes for centuries. And then there's their influence on the Persians. The Sogdian script, with its elegant flourishes, found its way into Persian administrative practices. It was the kind of cross-cultural synergy that today's corporate partnerships can only dream of. The Persians, in return, left their mark on Sogdian society through art and governance, creating a two-way street of cultural exchange that was as dynamic as it was complex. But let's not get carried away with visions of a harmonious cultural utopia. This wasn't always a smooth ride. The Sogdians faced their fair share of challenges in maintaining their cultural identity amid the constant ebb and flow of external influences. They had to navigate the tricky waters of cultural appropriation and adaptation with the finesse of a diplomat at a G20 summit. It was a balancing act that required constant negotiation and renegotiation of their place in the world. And while we're here, let's address the elephant in the room, the myth of Sogdian grandeur. It's easy to get swept up in the romanticism of a thriving ancient empire, but the reality was far grittier. Yes, there were moments of splendor, but they coexisted with the harsh realities of daily life, from the threat of invasion to the drudgery of manual labor. The Sogdians didn't lead lives of uninterrupted luxury. They worked hard to maintain their status on the Silk Road stage. Their society was fueled by a relentless drive for economic and cultural advancement, a pursuit that was as much about survival as it was about prosperity. The Sogdians understood that to thrive, they needed to be more than just merchants. They needed to be innovators, diplomats, and cultural chameleons. Their story is one of constant adaptation, a testament to the power of creativity and resilience in the face of ever-changing circumstances. The harsh truth is that while they left an indelible mark on history, their lives were a delicate dance on the edge of survival. They were constantly at the mercy of larger empires, shifting trade routes, and the whims of nature. Yet, in the midst of it all, they managed to create a legacy that transcended their immediate circumstances. In the end, the Sogdian Empire wasn't just a blip on the historical radar. It was a beacon of cultural connectivity and exchange. Their ability to absorb and reinterpret the world around them made them not just participants, but pioneers in the story of human civilization. And as we continue to unravel the layers of their history, it becomes clear that their legacy is as much about the art of adaptation as it is about the art itself. So, as we wrap up this chapter of the Sogdian saga, remember that their story is far from over. There are still more layers to peel back, more myths to bust, and more tales to tell. Because in the grand tapestry of history, the Sogdians are a vibrant thread that weaves together the complex interplay of commerce, culture, and creativity. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll delve deeper into their enduring impact on the world stage, a legacy that continues to resonate through the ages. As we peel back the layers of the Sogdian saga, we find ourselves at the doorstep of their decline, a story as inevitable as it is poignant. The Sogdian Empire, the Silk Road's favorite middleman, met its match in the form of rising Islamic empires and evolving trade routes. It turns out, even the most adept cultural chameleons can't dodge every curveball history throws their way. Picture it. The 7th century rolls around, and the Sogdians, nestled comfortably in their trade network throne, suddenly find themselves overshadowed by the Islamic caliphates sweeping in with the kind of fervor that would make any expansionist empire blush. The Umayyad Caliphate, with its eyes on the prize, didn't just knock politely on the door of Central Asia. they burst through it like a juggernaut, effectively redrawing the map of influence. The Sogdians, who had long operated in a world where they were the masters of their own destiny, now faced a new world order. And let's be clear, this wasn't a gentle nudge toward change. It was a full-blown shove. The arrival of Islam brought more than just a new religion. It brought a shift in the balance of power. The Sogdian city-states, once adept at playing the political field, now found themselves in a game where the rules were written in Arabic. The Umayyads weren't content to be mere trading partners. They wanted control, and they got it, transforming the Sogdian heartland into a province of the Islamic Empire. But it wasn't all swords and conquest. The Sogdians, ever the pragmatists, found ways to adapt. They embraced Islam, not just as a survival tactic, but as a new cultural thread to weave into their complex tapestry. Yet, this wasn't enough to stop the tide. The trading networks they once controlled began to shift. The Silk Road, that ancient artery of commerce, was rerouted by the new power dynamics. What was once a bustling highway of goods and ideas now found detours that bypassed the Sogdian toll booths. The city-states that had thrived on this lifeline began to wither like leaves in the desert sun. Let's talk numbers for a moment. During their peak, the Sogdians controlled trade routes that stretched over 3,000 miles from China to the Mediterranean. By the 8th century, however, the trade winds had shifted. The rise of maritime routes, thanks to advancements in shipbuilding and navigation, meant that traders could now bypass the lengthy and perilous overland journeys. Why risk sandstorms and bandits when you could sail with the breeze? The Sogdians, with their camel caravans and dusty roads, suddenly found themselves in the slow lane of commerce. And here's the kicker. The very adaptability that had been their greatest strength now became a double-edged sword. In their eagerness to integrate and thrive under new regimes, the Sogdians gradually lost the distinct cultural identity that had set them apart. Their language, once the lingua franca of the Silk Road, was replaced by Arabic and Persian. The cities that had been vibrant melting pots became shadows of their former selves, echoes of a bygone era. But before you start playing a Sama tune for the Sogdians, let's acknowledge their legacy. They might not have left behind towering monuments or epic poems of conquest, but their influence is embedded in the cultural DNA of the regions they touched. They were the unsung heroes of cultural exchange, the silent architects of globalization before it was a buzzword. The spread of Buddhism into China, the blending of Persian and Chinese art, the very idea of a multicultural society. These are the threads woven into the Sogdian legacy. As we reflect on their story, it's clear that the Sogdians offer a cautionary tale about the impermanence of commerce-based empires. They remind us that economic might, as powerful as it seems, is as fragile as a sandcastle before the tide. It's a lesson that resonates through history, from the Venetian traders of the Renaissance to the corporate giants of today. The Sogdians, with their intricate web of trade and diplomacy, show us that even the most strategic empire can't escape the whims of fate. So, as we wrap up this journey through the Sogdian Empire, let's give a sardonic nod to the irony of history. While the conquerors and kings get the grand statues and the chapters in textbooks, it's often the traders, the negotiators, the cultural intermediaries who quietly shape the world. The Sogdians may not have claimed empires, but they connected them. And in a world that often forgets the merchant in favor of the monarch, their story is a reminder that sometimes the greatest legacies are the ones that whisper rather than shout. In the end, the Sogdians were not just relics of a forgotten past, but pioneers of a connected future. Their empire may have faded, but their influence lingers in the corridors of history, a testament to the enduring power of trade, adaptation, and cultural exchange. So, the next time you find yourself marveling at the complexities of our globalized world, just remember, the Sogdians did it first, and they did it with a flair that would make any modern-day entrepreneur envious. Picture a world where the Iron Age was the new black, and tribal migrations were all the rage. No, this isn't the latest fantasy series dropping on your favorite streaming service. It's the real-life blockbuster of the Celtic kingdoms, rise around 1200 BCE. The Celts were the original influencers of the European continent, spreading their culture with the swagger of a viral tick-tock dance. But before we get too far into their cultural conquests, let's dial back to their early days and figure out how these tribes meandered their way across Europe. Starting with their origins, the Celtic tribes were a diverse bunch. No single monolithic entity here, folks. Around the 2nd millennium BCE, these tribes began their grand European tour from the region that now straddles modern-day Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Like any good rock band, they didn't stay put for long. By the time they hit their stride in the 1st millennium BCE, Celtic tribes had spread from the Iberian Peninsula to the British Isles, and as far east as the Balkans. Talk about covering ground. This sprawling migration looks less like a straight path, and more like a toddler's attempt at drawing a map with a crayon. Messy, unpredictable, and all over the place. So, why did these tribes decide to pack up their iron tools and hit the road? Well, part of it was survival. The Bronze Age was winding down, and iron was the next big thing. It was stronger, more durable, and, most importantly, cheaper than bronze. Iron became the backbone of Celtic society, influencing everything from agriculture to warfare. You could say the Celts were among the first to cash in on this early tech boom. Remember, this was a time when the price of bronze could make a modern housing market look affordable. The Celts were savvy enough to sidestep that crisis, embracing iron like it was the latest iPhone. Enter the Hallstatt culture, the OG Celtic society that paved the way for everything that followed. This archaeological culture, named after a small village in Austria, was the Celtic world's answer to Silicon Valley, a hub of innovation and relentless productivity from around 800 to 450 BCE. The Hallstatt people mastered ironworking and left behind a treasure trove of artifacts, from weapons to intricately designed jewelry. Their burial mounds, filled with these fancy goods, were basically the Instagram of their day, showing off wealth, status, and artistic flair for all to see, assuming you were willing to dig it up. But art and weapons weren't all the Hallstatt culture was about. They were also fierce warriors, with a penchant for going into battle with an enthusiasm that could only be matched by a middle school marching band on game day. The Celts developed unique fighting styles and weapons, like the long sword, which became a staple of their military might. They weren't just swinging for the fences. They were carving out a reputation across Europe as warriors not to be trifled with. And let's not forget their chariots. Yes, chariots. The Celts were rolling into battle with the kind of flair that would make any modern-day parade organizer weep with envy. Now, while the idea of noble savages and romanticized warriors sounds all very Braveheart, the reality was a bit grittier. Celtic society was no utopia. They were divided into tribes that often clashed as much with each other as with outsiders. You know that saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Well, the Celts skipped the friendship part and went straight to, the enemy of my enemy is also my enemy. Internal strife was a constant, and alliances were as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Yet despite the chaos, what really held the Celtic tribes together was their shared culture. Language, art, religion, it was the glue that kept the Celtic machine chugging along. Their language, a precursor to modern Celtic languages like Gaelic and Welsh, was the verbal currency that allowed these tribes to trade, negotiate, and occasionally yell at each other across Europe. Their art, characterized by intricate patterns and swirling designs, reflected a world in constant motion. Even today, Celtic knots and interlacing patterns remain iconic, a testament to their enduring cultural legacy. In religion, the Celts worshipped a pantheon of gods and goddesses, drawing parallels to the Greek and Roman systems, but with their own unique twist. Druids, the priestly class, were the rock stars of Celtic society, holding sway over religious and legal matters. These were the folks you'd want at your medieval trivia night, armed with encyclopedic knowledge of lore and law. But let's not get too rosy-eyed. The Druids also performed human sacrifices, which is a bit of a buzzkill if you were expecting a purely spiritual elder council. So, the early Celtic kingdoms weren't just about iron tools and warrior codes. They were a vibrant tapestry of art, language, and religion, all woven together with the threads of migration and conflict. The Celts didn't just adapt to their changing world. They sculpted it with iron hands and artistic eyes, leaving a legacy that would echo across the ages. Now, isn't that a history lesson worth tweeting about? But before we dive headfirst into the Celtic cauldron of intrigue and power plays, let's take a moment to address the elephant in the room, or perhaps the boar, given the setting. You see, the idea of the Celts as noble savages, that alluring image of wild warriors with a penchant for freedom and a disdain for Roman order is about as historically accurate as a Hollywood epic. Sure, they had their fair share of noble traits, but savage. That's a stretch even for the most dramatic of bards. By the 5th century BCE, the Celtic kingdoms were as complex as a modern tax code and about as romantic as a Monday morning. These weren't just tribes of freewheeling warriors gallivanting across the countryside. No, they were organized societies with intricate social and political structures. The Celts had a hierarchy that would make any corporate ladder climb a nod in appreciation. At the top were kings or chieftains, not unlike CEOs, wielding power with the backing of warrior aristocracies. Think of them as the board of directors, but with more swords and fewer PowerPoint presentations. The Druids, however, were the real power players. Forget what you've seen in fantasy series. These guys weren't just wandering the woods in robes spouting cryptic wisdom. Druids were the intellectual elite, the lawmakers, and the spiritual guides. They were the ones who knew which herbs could cure a headache and which could send you on a vision quest. They could settle disputes, predict the future, and even influence war strategies. Think of them as a combination of constitutional lawyers, spiritual advisors, and the kind of motivational speakers who could convince you to charge into battle. But let's not get too misty-eyed over the Druids. Despite the enchanting image of philosopher priests, they were also pragmatic, and at times ruthless. Human sacrifices weren't just a plot twist. They were part of the Druidic toolkit for keeping cosmic balance, or perhaps just maintaining their mystique and authority. So, while they might have been the original TED talkers, their talks occasionally ended with a rather grim standing ovation, literally. Now, in the kaleidoscope of Celtic politics, tribal confederations played a starring role. These alliances were like a medieval version of a LinkedIn network, offering strength in numbers but fraught with the same issues of trust and loyalty that plague any alliance. When the going was good, these tribes could unite against common threats, like Roman legions or rival tribes, but internal politics often turned them into a historical game of survivor. Alliances were as stable as a Jenga tower during an earthquake, with leaders constantly negotiating and renegotiating terms to keep the peace, or at least to keep the knives out of their backs. Economically, the Celtic world was a buzzing hive of activity, with an entrepreneurial spirit that would make today's startup culture blush. Forget stock markets and cryptocurrency. The Celts dealt in the original currency, barter. They were trading goods like iron tools, salt, and textiles, long before Bitcoin made it cool. The Celtic economy was a decentralized gig economy writ large, with artisans, farmers, and traders all hustling to get by. The exchange of goods wasn't just a necessity, it was an art form. In a world without Amazon or FedEx, everything from livestock to pottery was up for grabs, negotiated with the kind of fervor that could make a used car salesman nod in approval. And let's not overlook the role of women in this economic dance. Celtic women could own property, engage in trade, and wield influence both inside and outside the home. In some cases, they even led tribes into battle. While not exactly gender equality by modern standards, it was a progressive setup compared to many contemporary societies where women were seen and not heard, or even worse, neither seen nor heard. So, while the Celts are often painted with broad strokes of romanticism, the truth is far more nuanced. Behind the legends of fearless warriors and wise druids, there was a complex tapestry of politics, trade, and social norms. These were societies that thrived on their adaptability and resilience, constantly evolving to face new challenges and opportunities. As the Celtic kingdoms grew, they laid the groundwork for a legacy that would echo through history long after their swords were sheathed, and their druids' chants faded into the mist. In the grand scheme of things, the Celts were much more than their myths. They were innovators, negotiators, and strategists, crafting a world that was as much about survival and cunning as it was about honor and tradition. And as we continue to unravel their story, we'll find that the reality of the Celtic kingdoms is every bit as fascinating as the legends that have been spun around them. So, hold on to your talks, because the journey is just beginning. As the curtain rises on the 3rd century BCE, the Celts are strutting their stuff like the headliners of an ancient Coachella. This was their era, the peak of Celtic power, when they were the European rock stars, albeit with more swords and fewer pyrotechnics. While we can romanticize their prowess and panache, it's time to get real about what made these tribes tick, and how they managed to keep their European tour rolling without the benefit of GPS or even a reliable map. First up, let's tackle the infamous sack of Rome in 390 BCE. Picture a young Rome, not quite the marble-clad empire we love to critique, but a city with more ambition than fortification. Enter the Senans, a Celtic tribe led by the enigmatic Brennus. These guys rolled into Rome with the kind of confidence that would make any modern startup founder blush. According to the ancients, the Celts were so intimidating that Rome's defenders fled to the hills, leaving their city a buffet for the invaders. Brennus and his gang helped themselves, and when the Romans tried to buy them off, Brennus famously tossed his sword under the scales and declared, "Vi victis," woe to the vanquished. It's a line that rings with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for the closing act. But let's not get carried away by the epic vibes. The reality of Celtic warfare was a far cry from the choreographed chaos of a Hollywood battle scene. Archaeological evidence paints a different picture, one where strategy and surprise were just as important as brute force. Sure, the Celts had their flashy moments, what with their chariots and long swords, but they also understood the importance of logistics. Maintaining their sprawling network across Europe was like trying to run a multinational corporation with carrier pigeons. Communication was slow, and coordinating between tribes was as easy as herding cats. Angry, heavily armed cats at that. Let's talk about Vercingetorix, the dashing Gallic chieftain who could have given any Roman general a run for his money, or perhaps his toga. In 52 BCE, he united the Gallic tribes in a last-ditch stand against Julius Caesar. Vercingetorix was not just a warrior. He was a master strategist who knew the value of guerrilla tactics long before they became a military buzzword. At the Battle of Gergovia, Vercingetorix handed Caesar a rare defeat, proving that even the mightiest Roman legions could be outmaneuvered by a crafty Celt with a plan. Yet, Vercingetorix's crowning moment came at Alesia, where he pulled off a defensive stand so legendary that Caesar himself had to resort to building fortifications around the entire city to force a surrender. Imagine the logistical headache. Caesar's army constructing two walls, one to keep the defenders in and another to keep potential reinforcements out. It was a siege that tested the limits of Roman engineering and Celtic resolve. Ultimately, Vercingetorix surrendered, his defeat immortalized in the words of Julius Caesar's commentaries. But in the annals of Celtic history, his defiance remains a testament to their unyielding spirit. Now, let's debunk the myth of the Celts as disorganized rabble. Sure, they weren't marching in perfect lockstep like Roman legions, but they operated with a kind of chaotic brilliance that was hard to pin down. Their warfare was less about scripted battles and more about adaptability and seizing the moment. They excelled at ambushes and swift cavalry maneuvers, leveraging the terrain to their advantage. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of guerrilla marketing, unpredictable, effective, and occasionally disruptive in all the right ways. Economically, keeping this trans-European machine humming was no small feat. The Celts were trading across vast distances, long before the Silk Road became the ancient world's supply chain. They dealt in iron, salt, and textiles, commodities that crossed boundaries and cultures. Imagine the logistical ballet required to move goods from the British Isles to the Mediterranean without a single shipping container in sight. This network was a testament to the Celtic knack for commerce and negotiation, even if it meant the occasional misunderstanding due to language barriers or the odd case of misdirected goods. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Celtic world had its fair share of logistical nightmares. Coordinating between tribes spread across Europe was like trying to sync up a dozen rock bands for a festival without a single smartphone. Communication was as slow as a snail on a leisurely stroll, and alliances were as unpredictable as a band on the verge of a breakup. Trust was a rare commodity, and betrayals were as common as rain in a Celtic summer. Yet, through all the chaos and complexity, the Celts managed to carve out a legacy that still resonates today. They were more than just warriors. They were traders, negotiators, and cultural trendsetters. Their art, language, and traditions wove a rich tapestry that connected diverse tribes across the continent. Even as the Roman juggernaut loomed on the horizon, the Celts remained a force to be reckoned with, their echoes reverberating through history like the chords of an ancient ballad. So, as we dive deeper into the Celtic saga, remember that this was a world as vibrant and tumultuous as any modern epic. The Celts weren't just the stuff of legend. They were real people navigating a complex world with the tools they had: iron, trade, and a touch of audacity. Theirs is a tale of resilience and innovation, a testament to the power of culture and community in the face of overwhelming odds. And as we continue this journey, we'll uncover even more layers of Celtic intrigue, where myth and reality intertwine in the most fascinating of ways. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where the stakes only get higher, and the history even richer. As the Celtic saga unfurls into the 1st century BCE, the once mighty kingdoms faced a stark reality. Rome. Think of it like a global corporation expanding into local markets, except instead of buyouts, they favored legions and siege engines. The Celts, who had once danced all over Europe like it was their personal stage, now found themselves in the crosshairs of a civilization that played a long game of strategic chess. So, what went wrong for the Celts? For starters, let's talk about those strategic blunders. Imagine a family road trip where everyone disagrees on the directions, except the stakes aren't a missed exit, but a loss of autonomy. The Celts, despite their shared culture, were never a unified empire. They were more like a confederation of neighbors who occasionally borrowed sugar, but also squabbled over the fence line. This lack of unity was fertile ground for Roman generals like Julius Caesar, who saw opportunity in their fractured alliances. Caesar's Gallic Wars, starting in 58 BCE, were nothing short of a masterclass in divide and conquer. He exploited tribal rivalries with the finesse of a high school drama director stirring the pot before prom. By allying with some tribes against others, he systematically dismantled the Celtic resistance. The Romans weren't just superior in military might, they were experts in psychological warfare, turning Celtic leaders against one another with bribes and promises that were often as empty as a politician's campaign pledge. Now, let's pivot to those economic impacts. Picture the Celtic world as a grand monopoly board, only instead of plastic hotels, the Romans were laying down roads and military outposts. The famed Roman roads weren't just engineering marvels, they were tools of control. They connected outposts and fueled trade, while doubling as express lanes for Roman troops. The Via Dalmatia, constructed in 118 BCE, was one such road that sliced through southern Gaul, transforming it into a conduit for Roman goods and influence. This Romanization wasn't all doom and gloom, though. For the Celts, it was a mixed bag, a blend of opportunity and oppression. On one hand, these roads opened new markets and brought exotic goods. Imagine a Gallic chieftain's market stall suddenly featuring olive oil and wine alongside local brews. On the other hand, it also meant Roman taxes and laws, often as welcome as a surprise audit. As the Romans expanded their grip, the Celtic way of life began to shift. The centralized Roman economy, with its minted coins, challenged the Celtic barter system. Suddenly, those who adapted thrived, while others found themselves scrambling in a game that didn't come with a rulebook. It's worth noting that the Romans were less about cultural annihilation and more about integration, so long as you played by their rules. They were the ultimate influencers, reshaping local customs while borrowing the best bits for themselves. Yet, despite these seismic changes, the Celts weren't entirely passive victims. Some adapted, becoming Roman clients, and even gaining senatorial positions, a kind of ancient social climbing. Others clung fiercely to their traditions, resisting assimilation like a cat resisting a bath. Internal conflicts only made resistance harder, as tribal leaders debated whether to fight, flee, or make peace. In the grand tapestry of history, it's easy to romanticize the Celts as tragic heroes, standing defiantly against the Roman machine. But reality was more nuanced. Their decline wasn't just a tale of conquest, it was a story of transformation. The Celts weren't obliterated, they evolved. Their languages, crafts, and even some of their customs survived, woven into the Roman world like colorful threads in a new tapestry. The irony of Roman expansion was that it both destroyed and preserved Celtic culture. As roads and trade routes stretched across Europe, they carried more than just goods. They carried ideas, blending cultures in a way that would echo through the ages. The Celts' decline was not the end of their story, but merely a new chapter, one where their legacy would endure, albeit in a different guise. So, as we pause this chapter of the Celtic saga, remember that history is rarely as simple as conqueror and conquered. It's a dance of power, culture, and survival. The Celts may have lost their political dominance, but their spirit lived on, a testament to their resilience and adaptability. And as we inch closer to the conclusion of their story, we'll delve deeper into how their legacy shaped the very world that sought to subdue them. Stay tuned, because the next act is just getting started. The Celts' tale is far from over. Even as the Roman Empire swallowed up their lands, the Celts' cultural DNA seeped into the very marrow of European civilization. Fast forward to modern times, and you'll find traces of Celtic legacy tucked away in the most surprising places, like a rogue sock hiding in your laundry. Let's dive into how these ancient influences managed to leave their mark across centuries, from the spoken word to the very festivals we still celebrate. First off, the language. The Celts didn't just pack up their consonants and call it a day. Oh no, their linguistic legacy is alive and well. Consider the Celtic languages still spoken today: Irish Gaelic, Scottish Gaelic, Welsh and Breton. They're not just cultural relics, they're living languages, each with tens of thousands of speakers keeping the Celtic tongue wagging. Even English, that linguistic magpie, has borrowed a few Celtic words. The next time you find yourself in a bog or feel a banshee wail, tip your cap to the Celts. Then there's folklore, the original viral content. Celtic myths and legends have a way of sticking around, much like that catchy pop song you can't shake. Tales of fairies, banshees, and shape-shifting selkies peppered with moral lessons. These stories were the ancient world's answer to Netflix, binge-worthy and endlessly retellable. The allure of these tales isn't just in their whimsy, it's in their deeper truths about human nature and the mysteries of the world, wrapped in a shroud of magic and mist. Speaking of magic, let's talk festivals. Ever wondered why Halloween has a spooky vibe? Thank the Celts and their festival of Samhain, a celebration marking the end of the harvest season and the start of winter. It was believed that during this time, the veil between the living and the dead was thinnest, a concept that makes modern Halloween look like child's play. And then there's Beltane, the original summer block party, complete with bonfires meant to protect cattle and crops. These festivals were practical, marking agricultural cycles, yet they carried an otherworldly charm that still captivates us. Now, let's peel back the layers of the so-called Celtic mystique. Ah, the romantic image of the Celts, a people of nature, living in harmony with the land, warriors with flowing locks and fearless hearts. It's a compelling narrative, as irresistible as a period drama love story. But let's not get carried away by the misty moors and the rousing bagpipes. The reality was far more nuanced. The Celts were a complex society, with its fair share of political intrigue and social hierarchies. They were as likely to engage in a territorial skirmish as they were to recite a poem under the stars. This Celtic twilight is more poetic license than historical fact, a construct of later centuries yearning for a mythical past. So why does the Celtic mystique persist? Perhaps it's because it taps into a deep-seated desire for connection to something ancient and enduring. In a world of rapid change, the notion of an unbroken link to the past offers comfort. It's a reminder that beneath the layers of modernity, there's a shared human experience that transcends time. The Celts, with their rich traditions, offer a glimpse into that continuity. Yet, it's crucial to ground this romance in reality. The Celts weren't just dreamy-eyed bards, they were practical souls, too. Their adaptability was their superpower, enabling them to navigate the shifting sands of history. They didn't just sit back and let the Romans dictate terms. They negotiated, assimilated, and influenced. This adaptability ensured their cultural survival, allowing their legacy to trickle down through the ages like a persistent stream carving its path through stone. The enduring influence of the Celts is a testament to the power of cultural resilience. It's a reminder that history isn't a linear tale of triumph and defeat. It's a tapestry woven from countless threads of human experience. Whether it's in the echoes of a Celtic fiddle at a folk festival or the intricate patterns of a Celtic knot tattoo, their impact is woven into the very fabric of our world. As we wrap up this exploration of the Celts, it's clear that their legacy is more than just the sum of their myths. It's a legacy of language, art, and adaptability. It's a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure and evolve, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And in that, there's a lesson for us all. Just as the Celts adapted to the tides of history, so too must we navigate our own challenges with resilience and creativity. So, the next time you find yourself caught in the rapture of a Celtic melody or captivated by a tale from the Emerald Isle, remember that you're not just indulging in a bit of escapism. You're participating in a living tradition, one that has weathered the storms of time and continues to resonate in our shared cultural consciousness. The Celts may belong to the past, but their story is far from over. It lives on in each of us, a reminder that history is a living, breathing entity that shapes who we are today. You wake up in ancient Lorien, where the morning light isn't the only thing glinting. There's the promise of silver beneath your feet. A brisk Aegean breeze is a refreshing reminder that today's gonna be another brutal day in the mines. But hey, who said building an empire was easy? This is the real backbone of ancient Athens, not the marble columns or poetic epics. Here, in these gritty tunnels, is where the wealth that powers the city is extracted, nugget by arduous nugget. Lorien isn't just a dart on a map, it's the pulse of Athenian prosperity. This place churns out silver like it's going out of style, and it's no exaggeration to say that these mines have helped bankroll Athens' golden age. We're talking about over 20,000 tons of silver. Yep, tons, that flowed from these mines over the centuries. That's a lot of drachmas jingling in the pockets of Athenian statesmen. But before you get starry-eyed about shiny coins and fleets of triremes, let's talk about the human cost behind that glitter. As you prepare for another day in the labyrinthine mines, you're not just a worker, you're part of a mighty economic engine. Athens, with its democracy and its philosophers, owes a significant chunk of its success to the silver extracted here. It's this silver that funds the formidable Athenian navy, the real muscle behind the city-state's power. Picture it, rows of agile triremes slicing through the water, all financed by the sweat and toil of miners like you. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality of mining in ancient Greece is a far cry from the polished rhetoric of politicians. Down here, it's back-breaking labor. The mines are cramped, dark, and dangerous. Forget any notions of heroic miners wielding pickaxes with a flourish. Here, it's a monotonous grind, day in and day out. The air is thick with dust, and your lungs constantly remind you of the price of prosperity. The Athenian elite might toast to their victories and their democracy, but few of them venture down these shafts to see where the real work happens. It's a bit like the old saying, out of sight, out of mind. Yet, they're keenly aware that without Lorien's treasure trove, their lofty ambitions might not sail quite as smoothly. It's a harsh truth wrapped in a shiny package. Let's not forget that the labor force here isn't exactly volunteering for a day of fun. Many of the workers are slaves, trapped in this grueling cycle with no hope of escape. It's a sobering reminder that the ancient world wasn't all about philosophy and democracy. The darker side of prosperity is ever present, even in the golden age of Athens. So as you head into the mines, remember that you're part of something bigger, even if it's not as glamorous as the Parthenon or the Agora. The silver you extract doesn't just line the pockets of the elite. It shapes the policies and power dynamics of the ancient world. It's the lifeblood of an empire, a testament to both human ingenuity and the stark realities of ancient life. While the rest of the world might idealize the ancient Greeks as paragons of culture and intellect, you're living proof that there's grit and grind behind the glory. Each day in the mines is a testament to the labor that supports the grand narratives of history. As you descend into the depths, remember that you're not just mining silver, you're unearthing the very essence of Athenian might. As you step further into the shaft, the daylight fades, replaced by the dim, flickering glow of oil lamps. Welcome to the underbelly of ancient Athens, where the reality of its so-called enlightened civilization hits you like a sack of lead. It's a damp, claustrophobic world down here, with rocky walls pressing in like they're trying to give you an awkward hug. Forget the airy discussions of democracy happening above ground. Here, life is as gritty as it gets. Now, let's get real about the workforce. Picture 30,000 slaves laboring in these tunnels, not by choice, but by the cruel demands of a society that prizes silver over human lives. It's almost like a twisted version of Where's Waldo, except instead of a cheerful guy in stripes, you're looking for a glimpse of daylight among the mass of weary bodies. The Athenian upper crust may have been busy sipping wine and debating philosophy, but your daily grind involves swinging tools in the dark for 12-hour shifts. It's a stark reminder that even the most celebrated societies have a dark underside, quite literally. These mines weren't just a side hustle. They were the financial backbone of Athens. Picture the city's formidable navy, the pride of the Aegean, slicing through the water with a silver-funded swagger. Each trireme was like an ancient battleship, with a crew of 170 rowers and a mission to rule the waves. Guess what kept those ships afloat? Yep, the very same silver that you're clawing out of the earth. It's ironic, isn't it? The democracy we're taught to admire was built on the backs of those who never got a say in it. Digging deeper, both metaphorically and physically, you encounter the harsh conditions that define this subterranean world. The air is so thick with dust, you could almost chew it. You've got low ceilings that make you wish you were a few inches shorter, and let's not even start on the stifling heat. It's like working in a sauna minus the relaxation. Protective gear, forget about it. If you're lucky, you've got a rag to cover your mouth and nose. Safety standards weren't exactly a thing back in 500 BCE. Now, before you start thinking this sounds like the setup for a dystopian novel, let's talk numbers. The average yield from Lorien's mines was about 20,000 drachmas a year. For context, a single drachma could buy you a sheep or a month's rent, so we're talking significant cash flow here. It's no surprise that the Athenian elite were keen to keep these operations running smoothly, whatever the human cost. The irony. While the mines churned out silver to fuel the democratic dreams of Athens, the workers were denied the very freedoms that silver was supposed to buy. But hey, let's not get too cynical. There's a certain perverse beauty in the way these mines operated. Imagine a line of workers, passing stone after stone, each one a small piece of the Athenian empire. It's a human conveyor belt, and while it might not be glamorous, it's undeniably effective. Every nugget of silver unearthed down here is a testament to the sheer willpower and endurance of those who toiled in the dark. As you navigate these tunnels, keep in mind the sheer scale and ambition of it all. The Lorien mines weren't just holes in the ground. They were a sprawling network covering over 100 square miles. That's like having a small country's worth of tunnels beneath your feet. And while the ancient Greeks might not have had GPS, they sure knew how to map out a mining operation. The labyrinthine paths are a testament to their engineering prowess, even if it came at a steep human cost. So, as you continue your day in the mines, remember that you're not just part of a workforce. You're part of a complex economic machine. Every swing of the pickaxe, every dusty breath, is another step in the relentless march of Athenian progress. It's a harsh world, but it's also a fascinating one, where the lines between glory and grind blur like the shadows on these rock walls. As we wrap up this trek into the heart of ancient mining, let's leave some questions hanging in the air. What does it say about a society that builds its greatness on the toil of those it considers lesser? And what lessons can we learn from a civilization that could debate ethics while ignoring the suffering beneath its feet? These are the riddles of history. And while we might not have all the answers yet, we've got plenty of time to ponder them in the next part of our journey. And so, as the afternoon light starts to slant through the dusty air, we clamber out of the subterranean labyrinth and blink into the sun's glare. Finally, a gulp of fresh air and a chance to stretch those aching muscles. But don't get too comfortable. Our exploration of ancient mining is just getting warmed up. It's time to talk about the tools of the trade, the real stars of this gritty show. Hammers, chisels, and the fiery ingenuity of fire setting. Sure, the idea of using fire to break rocks might sound like a caveman solution, but don't be too quick to judge. Fire setting was cutting edge for its time, a bit like discovering the wheel, but with a lot more sweat and singed eyebrows. The process was simple yet effective. Miners would stack wood against the rock face, set it ablaze, and let the heat do its magic. The thermal expansion would cause the rock to crack, making it easier to chisel away. Think of it as nature's own dynamite, minus the boom. It was hot, smoky, and probably not great for your lungs, but it got the job done. Now, let's debunk a few myths. No, the ancient Greeks weren't swinging around golden hammers or wielding magical chisels. The tools were as basic as they come, wooden handles and iron heads, practical and functional. Yet in their rust-covered simplicity, they were vital to the operation. An average hammer weighed about 2 kilograms, which might not sound like much until you've been swinging it for hours on end. These tools were the unsung heroes of the Athenian economy, pounding out fortunes one exhausting blow at a time. Innovation wasn't born in a flash of genius, but rather out of sheer necessity. The Laurian mines were no place for slackers. With around 30,000 slaves working the shafts, efficiency wasn't just a goal, it was a mandate. It's not like the overseers were handing out Employee of the Month awards. Every tool had to earn its keep, and the miners wielded them with the precision of a surgeon, albeit one who spent the last decade in a dimly lit cave. But let's not forget the environmental impact of these ancient operations. The Greeks weren't exactly eco-warriors, and why would they be? They were too busy turning rocks into riches. Fire setting left the landscape looking like a particularly aggressive game of King of the Hill had taken place. Entire hillsides were scarred and stripped bare, and the once lush vegetation was reduced to ash and rubble. It's a harsh reminder that progress often leaves a brutal mark on the world it transforms. Speaking of transformation, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. The landscape around Laurian wasn't just physically altered, it was reshaped economically and politically. The extraction of silver fueled Athens' dominance over the Aegean, turning a modest city-state into an empire. It's the kind of rags-to-riches story that would make even the Kardashians do a double take. But all this glory came at a steep cost, paid in sweat and human suffering. The irony. While Athens was busy debating the finer points of democracy, they were also perfecting the art of exploitation. The silver that built temples and funded philosophers came from a system that cared little for the individuals who labored in the shadows. It's a classic case of moral myopia, where the shine of success blinds society to the darkness beneath. Now, before you start thinking this sounds like a script for an ancient Greek tragedy, remember that this is the complex web of human history we're dealing with. Progress is never just a straight line. It's a tangled mess of ambition, sacrifice, and often a hearty dose of hypocrisy. The Greeks might have penned epics about heroes and gods, but the real story was unfolding in the mines, where men faced their own daily trials without the promise of poetic immortality. As the afternoon stretches on, the tools and techniques of ancient mining reveal a world driven by necessity, not luxury. It's a testament to human endurance and a reminder that even in the depths of history, the quest for progress was fraught with challenges and contradictions. We've seen the ingenuity and the impact, but the day isn't over yet. There's more to uncover, more myths to bust, and more truths to face as we continue our journey through the annals of ancient Greece. Stay tuned, because the story of mining in Laurian is as deep and winding as the tunnels themselves. As the shadows grow long, and the Aegean sun begins its lazy descent, we swap the grime of the mines for a topic just as murky, the politics of ancient Greek mining. Picture this. Laurian's mines aren't just about blistered hands and silver veins. They're also a hotbed of political maneuvering and economic gymnastics that would make even Wall Street brokers blink in admiration or envy. Let's dive into the intricacies of Athenian mining laws. You see, it wasn't just a free-for-all where anyone with a pickaxe and a dream could start digging. The Athenians were a bit more sophisticated than that. They had a leasing system where wealthy citizens, the so-called liturgists, could invest in mining operations. Think of it as buying shares in Google, but instead of search algorithms, you're banking on shiny rocks buried underground. These investors, known as ergasterian owners, would lease a section of the mine and in return pocket a portion of the profits. It was capitalism with a toga twist. And what about those profits? Well, the silver wasn't just melted down into drachmas to jingle in the pockets of Athens' elite. A hefty chunk went straight to the state. We're talking about a 50-50 split, with the city taking its share to fund everything from the Parthenon's marble facelift to the salaries of jurors in the democratic courts. Yes, you heard that right. Athens' much-lauded democracy was partly bankrolled by subterranean labor. If that doesn't put a spin on the phrase, money talks, I don't know what does. But let's not gloss over the other half of the profits. The mining ventures were a golden goose for private investors. While the state was busy playing patron to the arts and philosophers, these savvy citizens were building their own personal empires. It's a classic tale of wealth concentration. The rich get richer, and the poor get, well, a front row seat to someone else's prosperity. The distribution of mining wealth was less a trickle and more of a torrent that bypassed the majority. It's almost poetic how the very system that touted equality was fueled by inequality. Now, here's where things get juicy. You think with all this silver sloshing around, the wealth would trickle down to the miners, right? Wrong. The workers toiling away in Lorien were the unsung heroes who never quite made it to the victory parade. Most of them were slaves who saw about as much silver as a vegetarian sea steak. Their labor underpinned the system, yet they were larked out of its benefits, a sobering reminder that the wheels of progress are often lubricated by those left behind. Speaking of progress, let's talk about the Athenian notion of democratic wealth distribution. On paper, it sounds delightful, almost utopian. But peel back the layers of rhetoric, and the reality is far less rosy. Sure, Athenian citizens had a say in the assembly, but not everyone living and working in Athens was a citizen. Women, slaves, and medics, foreign residents, were excluded, which means the democracy was more of a VIP club than an all-inclusive affair. The wealth generated by the mines was as much about maintaining social hierarchies as it was about civic pride. And then there was the little matter of taxes, or rather, the lack thereof. Because in Athens, if you were rich enough to invest in a mine, you were also rich enough to avoid paying taxes through a system called liturgies. Essentially, wealthy citizens funded public projects like festivals or warships as a means of showing off their civic spirit, while conveniently sidestepping any formal tax obligations. It's the ancient equivalent of sponsoring a football stadium and getting to slap your name on it. So, what's the takeaway here? The mines of Lorien were a microcosm of the broader Athenian society, ambitious, resourceful, and rife with contradictions. The city-state's golden age was bolstered by a mining operation that was as much about politics and power as it was about precious metals. The silver extracted from Lorien didn't just fund Athenian might. It forged a complex economic structure layered with inequality. As the evening air cools and the moon begins its ascent, ponder the irony of it all. Athens, the cradle of democracy, was also a place where wealth and power were tightly interwoven with exploitation. The very foundations of their society were built on a system that, for all its glittering achievements, left many in the shadows. And while the Athenians might have excelled at the art of debate, the stories untold beneath their feet speak volumes about the human cost of progress. But don't worry, the tale doesn't end here. There's more to uncover, more layers to peel back, as we continue our journey through the labyrinth of ancient Greek mining. So stick around, because the night is young, and history's got plenty of secrets left to reveal. As the moonlight casts a silvery hue over the Athenian landscape, you can almost hear the ghosts of ancient miners whispering through the cool night air, a reminder that their toil laid the groundwork for a civilization that still dazzles us today. But let's not get too swept up in the romantic glow of ancient Greece. While we love to hail Athens as the birthplace of democracy, a city where philosophy flourished like a well-tended olive grove, the reality was far more complicated, much like a Greek tragedy where the hero's flaws are as profound as his virtues. You see, Athens wasn't just about toga-clad philosophers and the Socratic method. It was a place where ideals and reality often wrestled like two gladiators in an amphitheater. While the city prided itself on democratic principles, it was also immensely dependent on an economic system underpinned by the very antithesis of democracy, slavery. Lorien, the beating heart of Athenian wealth, stands as a testament to this contradiction. It's like Athens was the ultimate multitasker, debating ethics in the agora while quietly profiting from the less-than-ethical labor in the mines. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of this economic backbone. Remember those 30,000 slaves we talked about? They were the linchpins of an operation that produced over 20,000 tons of silver throughout antiquity. Without them, the Athenian navy might have been more of a bathtub fleet. And while democracy was the talk of the town, the voices of these workers were conspicuously absent from the conversation. It's one of history's ironies that the cradle of democracy was cradled by the labor of those who had no say in it at all. But let's not kid ourselves. Athens wasn't alone in this economic hypocrisy. The legacy of ancient Greek mining laid the groundwork for future industries across the globe. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and you'll find echoes of Lorien in places like the coal mines of the Industrial Revolution or the diamond fields of 19th century South Africa. The pattern is as old as civilization itself. Technological advancement and economic growth often come with a heavy human price tag. It's like a timeless dance where prosperity leads and exploitation follows closely behind. The Athenian approach to mining also set a precedent for the economic structures that would shape future societies. The leasing system, where wealthy citizens could invest in and profit from mining operations, resembles modern-day capitalism more than you might think. Swap out silver for stocks, and you've got the blueprint for Wall Street. It's a testament to the enduring nature of economic ambition, where the pursuit of wealth often overshadows the means by which it is achieved. And yet, amid the grit and grind, there's an undeniable allure to the story of ancient Greece. The romanticized narrative of Athens as the beacon of culture and democracy continues to captivate us, perhaps because it speaks to our own ideals and aspirations. We love a good underdog story, and Athens, rising from a modest city-state to a dominant power, fits the bill. But like any good story, it's essential to read between the lines to understand that the shine of silver often obscures the shadows it casts. So, what can we learn from this ancient industry, and how do its lessons apply to our modern world? For starters, it's a reminder that progress often comes at a cost that is frequently borne by those with the least power to protest. Whether it's the miners of Lorien or the factory workers of today, the dynamics of labor and capital remain a constant in the human story. It's a call to action, urging us to consider the ethical implications of our economic systems and to strive for a balance between prosperity and equity. As the night deepens, let's also reflect on the enduring myths that shape our understanding of history. The stories we tell about ancient Greece, with its gods and heroes, are as much about who we want to be as they are about who we were. They remind us of the dual nature of human ambition, our capacity for greatness, tempered by our propensity for exploitation. The legacy of ancient Greek mining is a mirror held up to our modern world, reflecting both our achievements and our shortcomings. In the end, the mines of Lorien are more than just historical footnotes. They are a testament to the complexity of human progress. They remind us that the quest for wealth and power is as ancient as civilization itself, and that the stories we inherit are only as honest as our willingness to confront their darker sides. So, as you drift off to sleep, ponder this. In every silver coin that jingled in Athenian pockets, there was a story of sacrifice, a tale of ambition and toil that resonates through the ages. And in understanding these stories, perhaps we can forge a future that honors the past while striving for a more equitable world. In the grand theater of history, the Visigoths were the unruly teenagers who showed up uninvited, raided your fridge, and then decided to crash on your couch for a couple hundred years. The story of their rise from the ragtag band of wanderers to the rulers of Iberia is as chaotic as a Black Friday sale, full of unexpected twists, broken myths, and a lot of elbowing through the crowd. The Visigoths originally hailed from somewhere around the Baltic Sea, but like many good stories, they were a bit fuzzy on the details. What we do know is that by the 3rd century AD, they were already causing headaches for the Roman Empire. Rome, in its imperial prime, was like the ancient world's celebrity influencer. Everyone wanted a piece of it. But while most were content with following at a distance, the Visigoths preferred the more hands-on approach. After a few centuries of what could politely be called animosity between these two groups, the Visigoths made a bold move that would forever mark their place in history. In 410 AD, under the leadership of their king, Alaric I, they did the unthinkable. They sacked Rome. Now, before Alaric's grand tour of the Eternal City, Rome had been touted as unsackable, the Mike Tyson of ancient cities, undefeated and seemingly invincible. But like every overly hyped event, the reality was more underwhelming than anticipated. Alaric and his band of merry marauders stormed the city for 3 days, looting, pillaging, and generally having a grand old time at Rome's expense. The sack of Rome was a seismic event, not because of the physical destruction, though plenty of statues were decapitated and treasures carted off, but because of what it symbolized. It was like finding out your favorite superhero had a glass jaw. Suddenly, the idea of Rome as this indestructible force was shattered. The myth of its invincibility crumbled alongside its looted temples. Now, One might think that after such a spicy episode, the Visigoths would be content to vanish into the annals of history with their loot. But no, they were just getting started. Having tasted the sweet nectar of conquest, they set their eyes on a more permanent gig. Real estate in the Iberian Peninsula. Settling down wasn't exactly in the Visigothic DNA. For centuries, they had been the quintessential nomads, more comfortable with saddle sores than homeowners' association fees. But by the 5th century, the Roman Empire was on the decline, and the Iberian Peninsula was looking like prime property. It's important to remember that, around this time, Iberia was a bit like an open house on a Sunday afternoon. Everyone was wandering in and out, checking the place out. The Romans had been there for centuries, but with their empire cracking at the seams, they were more interested in putting out fires elsewhere than managing their Iberian backyard. The Visigoths, seeing an opportunity, swooped in and decided to make it their own. In 418 AD, the Western Roman Emperor Honorius, perhaps exhausted from dealing with barbarian invasions and internal strife, formally recognized the Visigoths as foederati, or allies, in the region of Aquitaine in southern Gaul. This was essentially Rome saying, "You can stay here, just promise to keep the noise down and maybe help out with the occasional barbarian nuisance." This agreement was a win-win. The Romans got a buffer against other pesky invaders, and the Visigoths got a place they could start calling home. But as we know, the best-laid plans of mice and men often go awry. It wasn't long before the Visigoths, feeling cramped in their new digs, decided they needed more space and began encroaching further into the peninsula. By the late 5th century, the Visigoths had firmly planted their boots in Iberian soil. Under the leadership of Uric, who ruled from 466 to 484 AD, they expanded their territory significantly, effectively controlling most of Iberia and parts of Gaul. Uric was a savvy leader, one who understood that ruling a kingdom required more than just a strong sword arm. He codified laws and worked to integrate the Romanized population with his Gothic warriors, a move that was part diplomacy, part necessity. After all, maintaining a kingdom was a bit more complex than leading a raiding party. The Visigoths were learning the delicate balance of governance. They had to juggle the expectations of their Gothic nobility, who were used to the freedom of the warrior lifestyle, with the realities of managing a settled population. It was a bit like trying to convince a band of pirates to run a cruise ship. But Uric managed to keep things steady, and by the time of his death, the Visigoths were well on their way to being more than just a footnote in history. So, here we have it. From barbarian roots to Iberian landlords, the Visigoths' early story is one of transformation and adaptation. They dismantled the myth of Rome's eternal dominance, and in doing so, carved out a place for themselves in the sun-drenched lands of Iberia. Stay tuned, my friends, because this is just the beginning of the saga. The Visigoths are far from done making history, and will be following their trail of chaos and conquest every step of the way. But dear listeners, don't break out the popcorn just yet, because the Visigoth saga's about to get juicier than a soap opera. As the 5th century rolled into the 6th, the Visigothic kingdom was shaping up to be a medieval version of Game of Thrones, complete with power struggles, betrayals, and enough kings to fill a royal bingo card. You see, while Uric had managed to stabilize things, his successors found holding onto power was like trying to keep a grip on a greased pig. Let's dive into these royal shenanigans, starting with Uric's son, Alaric Roman II. Alaric Roman II reigned from 484 to 507 AD, a period filled with enough political drama to make Machiavelli blush. His main claim to fame, or infamy, depending on who you ask, was his attempt to codify laws. The Breviary of Alaric, a collection of Roman laws adapted for Visigothic use, was his way of saying, "Hey, we might be Goths, but we've got rules." Sounds like a decent plan, right? Well, the problem was, while Alaric was busy playing lawmaker, he forgot to play power broker. Enter Clovis, king of the Franks, who saw Alaric's legal-mindedness as a perfect opportunity to expand his own territory. Clovis had a simple philosophy. Why negotiate when you can conquer? By 507 AD, the Battle of Vouillé saw Clovis's forces trounce Alaric's, sending him to an early grave and leaving the Visigothic territory in Gaul ripe for the picking. This was a costly affair, not just in terms of lives lost, but also in the political capital that Alaric had spent years building. The defeat at Vuelay didn't just shrink the Visigothic kingdom geographically, it also shook its core politically. With Gaul mostly lost, the Visigoths turned their full attention to Iberia, but internal strife soon reared its ugly head. Alaric's successors were like contestants on a reality show, each vying for the crown in increasingly cutthroat ways. From 507 to 531 AD, the kingdom saw a revolving door of rulers, each with a shorter tenure than the last. It was like speed dating, but with crowns and daggers. Alaric, who ruled until 531 AD, was one of the more memorable contestants in this royal roulette. He tried to strengthen ties with the Franks through marriage, but when that relationship soured faster than milk in the sun, he found himself assassinated by his own men. This backstabbing wasn't just a royal pastime, it was practically a sport. Over the next few decades, the Visigothic throne changed hands more times than a hot potato, with rulers like Theudes and Theudigisal meeting similarly sticky ends. Theudes, ruling from 531 to 548 AD, was a former Ostrogoth general with a penchant for intrigue. He managed to hold on to power for nearly 2 decades, a Herculean feat in those tumultuous times, thanks to his military acumen and a knack for playing both sides against the middle. Yet even he couldn't escape the kingdom's penchant for political drama, ultimately meeting his demise at the hands of a disgruntled palace guard. The hazards of job security in the medieval world. Then there was Agila I, whose reign from 549 to 554 AD was marked by civil war and rebellion. It was as if the Visigothic kingdom had inherited a curse. The moment anyone sat on the throne, dissent and betrayal followed like clockwork. Agila's reign ended with his assassination during a revolt led by a rival claimant, Athanagild. In this kingdom, loyalty was as rare as a unicorn, and even less reliable. Athanagild's rise to power was emblematic of the times. He leveraged a civil war to oust Agila I, then made the kind of backroom deals that would make a modern politician blush. His reign, from 554 to 567 AD, brought a more stable period to the kingdom, partly due to his strategic alliances with the Byzantine Empire. However, these alliances were as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. The Byzantines, ever the opportunists, saw Iberia as a new frontier for influence, and Athanagild's request for their aid was a double-edged sword. Sure, they helped him secure the throne, but their presence in Iberia was like inviting a fox into the henhouse. Economically, the Visigothic kingdom was a patchwork quilt of prosperity and poverty. The Visigoths controlled key trade routes that crossed the peninsula, collecting tolls and taxes that filled their coffers. Yet, the constant infighting drained resources faster than a leaky bucket. Maintaining an army was expensive, and the constant threat of rebellion meant that funds often went to securing loyalty rather than improving infrastructure or economic stability. Despite these challenges, the Visigoths were shrewd in their management of resources. They adopted Roman agricultural practices, which helped boost food production and support a growing population. But the real economic ace up their sleeve was their control of the mineral-rich regions of Iberia. Silver from mines in places like Cartagena and Almudena proved a lucrative source of wealth, funding both the kingdom's defense and its rulers' penchant for lavish lifestyles. Culturally, the Visigoths were a fascinating blend of Gothic and Roman traditions. They retained their Germanic language and customs, but adopted Roman administrative practices and legal systems. This cultural fusion was both a strength and a weakness. On one hand, it allowed the Visigoths to integrate with the Romanized population of Iberia, creating a more cohesive society. On the other, it created tensions between the Gothic elite and the Romanized locals, each group vying for dominance in the kingdom's political and cultural landscape. Religion played a significant role in these tensions. The Visigoths initially adhered to Arian Christianity, a belief that was at odds with the Catholic majority in Iberia. This religious divide was more than just a theological debate. It was a political fault line, one that rulers like Athanagild had to navigate with care. The eventual conversion of the Visigothic kingdom to Catholicism in 589 AD under King Record would be a game changer, but that's a story for another part. Throughout these tumultuous years, the Visigoths learned a harsh truth. Building a kingdom was hard, but keeping it together was even harder. Their story was a testament to the complexities of early medieval politics, where alliances were fleeting and power was as tangible as mist. Yet, despite the betrayals and battles, the Visigoths persevered. They were more than just conquerors. They were survivors, navigating the treacherous waters of history with a mix of cunning, courage, and a dash of chaos. As we wrap up this part of our saga, remember this. The Visigoths' journey was far from over. Their story would continue to evolve, shaped by new challenges and new opportunities. So stay tuned, because the next chapter promises even more twists, turns, and tantalizing tales from the annals of history. And so, as the Visigothic saga unfolds, let's shift our gaze from the bloody thrones to the bustling markets and fields of the kingdom. Because, let's face it, keeping a kingdom running isn't just about winning battles and wearing shiny crowns. Nope, it's about the nitty-gritty of economics and social order. The stuff that doesn't get a lot of screen time in epic tales, but is vital if you want your kingdom to survive longer than a reality TV star's career. First up, let's talk trade. The Visigoths had a knack for commerce that would make an e-commerce giant envious. Picture this, a kingdom strategically perched on the Iberian Peninsula with its fingers in all the right pies, or trade routes in this case. They controlled crucial overland routes that linked the Mediterranean to the Atlantic, making them the toll collectors of Europe. It was like owning the only bridge into town, and boy, did they make sure everyone paid the troll toll. But it wasn't just about collecting cash at the crossroads. This was an age where goods flowed like the wine at a Greek symposium. Mediterranean olive oil, Frankish weapons, African gold, and Iberian silver all traded hands. The Visigoths were smack dab in the middle, turning a tidy profit by facilitating these exchanges. It was like a medieval stock exchange, only with fewer suits and more chainmail. Now, let's not pretend the Visigoths were running a seamless operation here. Remember, this was well before the age of spreadsheets and accounting software. There was no IRS breathing down their necks, but that didn't mean they were flying blind. Their taxation system was more about shrewd negotiation than hard numbers. Sure, they levied taxes on land, trade, and occasionally on the populace, but it was the adaptability of their system that kept the kingdom in the black. The Visigoths understood something modern bureaucracies often miss. Keep it simple, stupid. Tax collectors, often local nobles, had a fair bit of autonomy, but were expected to deliver a cut to the king's coffers. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was less prone to the kind of red tape that would make a modern-day bureaucrat's head spin. If there ever was a lesson in efficient medieval governance, it was this. Sometimes less is more. Speaking of governance, let's pivot to the Visigothic legal system, a surprising beacon of progressiveness in a world where justice often meant whoever had the bigger sword. The Visigothic Code, or the Lex Visigothorum if you're feeling fancy, was a legal framework that would make a Roman proud. Introduced under King Uric and refined by his successors, it blended Roman law with traditional Gothic customs. Think of it as a best-of album for ancient legal systems. The code wasn't just about keeping the peace, it was about creating a stable society. It covered everything from property rights to inheritance laws, and even outlined penalties for crimes. Theft might get you a hefty fine, while more severe offenses could see you exiled or worse. What made this legal system stand out, though, was its inclusivity. It applied to both Goths and Romans living in the kingdom, a rare attempt at unifying diverse populations under a single legal umbrella. Here's where the Visigoths deserve a slow clap. Their legal system was shockingly detailed about protecting the rights of individuals, including women. Yes, you heard that right. In a time when women were often seen as little more than bargaining chips, the Visigothic Code recognized their rights in marriage and inheritance. It wasn't full equality, but in a world that was still a few centuries away from the Magna Carta, it was a step in the right direction. The importance of this legal framework can't be overstated. It provided a measure of predictability and order in a kingdom that's main export had been chaos. Sure, the throne might have had a higher turnover rate than a fast food joint, but the legal system was the glue that held the empire together. It gave the people something to rely on, even when their rulers were busy playing musical chairs with the crown. While we're on the topic of societal structure, let's not forget the cultural melting pot that was the Visigothic kingdom. This was a realm where Roman, Gothic, and even Jewish and Christian influences simmered together like a medieval stew. The result was a unique cultural identity that sometimes clashed, but often melded in fascinating ways. Economically, the Visigoths knew that you couldn't just live off trade and taxes alone. Agriculture was the backbone of their society, and they didn't mess around. They implemented Roman farming techniques, which were the ancient equivalent of going organic and local. This boosted productivity and supported a growing population, a crucial factor when your neighbors had a habit of eyeing your land hungrily. Oh, and let's not forget about those silver mines. Talk about a jackpot. The mines in regions like Cartagena and Almadane were like the medieval equivalent of hitting oil in Texas. The profits from these ventures funded military campaigns, lavish court life, and inevitably, the bribes needed to keep those pesky nobles in line. In a way, silver was the lifeblood of the kingdom, financing both its defense and its debauchery. So, what does all this mean in the grand scheme of things? Well, for one, it shows that the Visigoths weren't just a bunch of marauding barbarians. They were savvy rulers who knew how to maintain a kingdom, even if they sometimes tripped over their own ambitions. Their economic and social structures were more than just the backdrop to their political drama. They were the foundation that allowed the Visigoths to hold onto power amidst the chaos. As we continue to unravel the threads of the Visigothic tapestry, remember that each decision, each law, and each trade agreement was a stepping stone in their journey. Sure, they might have stumbled along the way, but they were building something that would leave a lasting imprint on history. So stay tuned, because the next chapter is just around the corner, and it's bound to be full of more surprises, skullduggery, and maybe even a little redemption. And as we find ourselves perched on the edge of the next chapter in the Visigothic saga, it's time to dive into the religious roller coaster that would define their cultural and political evolution. You see, in the Visigothic kingdom, faith wasn't just about saving your soul. It was a VIP pass to power, prestige, and occasionally a free pass from getting your head served on a platter. Let's talk Arian Christianity, the Visigoths' original flavor of choice. Arianism was the theological hot potato of the time, with its followers believing that Christ was distinct from and subordinate to God the Father. Now, this might sound like splitting divine hairs, but in an era when religious differences could ignite wars faster than a match in a fireworks factory, this was serious business. The Visigoths, along with many other Germanic tribes, had embraced Arian Christianity, which set them at odds with the Romanized Catholic majority of Iberia. This religious divide was more than just a Sunday morning squabble. The Arians and Catholics weren't just arguing over theological points. Their differences symbolized deeper cultural and political rifts. For the Visigothic nobility, sticking to Arianism was a way to maintain their distinct identity and avoid getting swallowed whole by the Romanized masses. But as any shrewd politician will tell you, unity is power, and nothing unites like a common belief system or the threat of being ousted by your own subjects. Enter King Record I, who saw the writing on the wall. Record reigned from 586 to 601 AD, and he was the guy who decided enough was enough with the religious bickering. Recognizing that a kingdom divided against itself is about as stable as a Jenga tower in a hurricane, Record made a bold move. He converted to Catholicism in 589 AD at the Third Council of Toledo. This was the Visigothic equivalent of a mic drop moment, and it sent shockwaves through the kingdom. The conversion wasn't just a personal epiphany, it was a calculated power play. By aligning the kingdom with the Catholic Church, Record was effectively saying, "Hey, look at us. We're just like you now." It was a savvy move to win over the Catholic majority and stabilize his rule. Overnight, the Visigothic kingdom went from being the oddball outsider to having a seat at the table of European Christendom. And let's not forget the political perks. A unified religious front meant stronger alliances with other Catholic kingdoms, not to mention a more cohesive internal structure. But let's not get too misty-eyed over Record's conversion. This wasn't an overnight transformation where everyone suddenly held hands and sang hymns together. The shift from Arianism to Catholicism was about as smooth as a three-wheeled cart on a cobblestone street. There were plenty of holdouts, particularly among the Gothic nobility who weren't thrilled about giving up their religious, and thus political, power. Record had to navigate this delicate transition with all the finesse of a tightrope walker juggling flaming swords. To sweeten the deal, Record didn't just rely on the promise of spiritual salvation. He knew he had to appeal to the wallets and power structures of the time. He allowed the former Aryan clergy to retain their positions, which was a bit like giving a consolation prize to the losing team. This pragmatic approach helped ease the transition, ensuring that the move to Catholicism didn't result in an all-out revolt. Record's actions were a masterclass in political maneuvering, proving once again that in the Game of Thrones, medieval or otherwise, adaptability is key. And let's talk economics, because religion wasn't just a Sunday affair, it was big business. A Catholic kingdom meant new opportunities for economic partnerships and alliances with other Christian territories. Trade routes that might have been closed to the Aryans suddenly opened up, and the Church, with its vast networks and connections, became a powerful ally in maintaining those all-important economic ties. The conversion to Catholicism wasn't just a spiritual awakening. It was an economic strategy that paid dividends long after Record's reign. But with great power comes great responsibility, or at least great potential for conflict. While the conversion did much to unify the kingdom, it also stirred up new tensions. The Jewish communities in Iberia, which had thrived under the relatively tolerant Aryan rule, suddenly found themselves in a precarious position. The Visigothic kings, now eager to prove their Catholic credentials, began to impose restrictions on Jewish practices and rites, a dark turn that would have lasting consequences. It's a stark reminder that in the pursuit of unity, those who don't fit the mold can often become collateral damage. Through this religious transformation, the Visigoths managed to carve out a more stable identity, blending their Gothic traditions with the Catholic framework. It was a balancing act worthy of a circus high wire, managing to keep the kingdom from fracturing under the weight of its own diversity. Yet, as with all things Visigothic, this newfound unity was never guaranteed. The kingdom's history was a reminder that stability was a fleeting thing, constantly threatened by internal strife and external pressures. In the grand tapestry of history, the Visigothic conversion to Catholicism is a vivid thread, showcasing the intersection of faith, politics, and power. It was a turning point that would shape the destiny of the kingdom, impacting its relationships both within and beyond Iberian borders. But as we know, the story of the Visigoths is one of perpetual evolution, and the saga doesn't end here. There are more chapters to unfold, more challenges to face, and more myths to debunk as we continue to follow their journey through the annals of history. Stay tuned, because the Visigothic saga is far from over, and the next twist is just around the corner. As the Visigothic saga unfolded, the kingdom found itself on the cusp of a new era, one that would be marked by seismic shifts and unforeseen challenges. The conversion to Catholicism had been a savvy political move, but like an overly optimistic weather forecast, it didn't predict the storm brewing on the horizon. The Visigoths were about to discover that, while unity might have bolstered their internal structure, it couldn't shield them from the external forces gathering at their borders. Fast forward to the early 8th century, and the Visigothic kingdom was about as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. By this time, internal divisions had become as common as the Iberian sun. Factions within the nobility jockeyed for power, like contestants in a never-ending Game of Thrones. The political scene was a mess of alliances, betrayals, and the occasional assassination, with each noble seemingly more interested in personal gain than the kingdom's collective well-being. It was a classic example of the old adage, divide and conquer. But here, the Visigoths managed to do most of the dividing themselves. While the nobles squabbled, a new threat emerged from the south, the burgeoning Muslim caliphate. These were no mere raiders or opportunists. They were a well-organized force, driven by both religious fervor and the promise of conquest. By 711 AD, the Muslim forces, led by Tariq ibn Ziyad, had landed at Gibraltar, ready to test the mettle of the Visigothic defenses. With an army reportedly numbering around 7,000, compared to the Visigoths' 25,000, the odds seemed in favor of the defenders. But numbers alone don't win battles. Strategy and unity do. Enter the Battle of Guadalete, a clash that would decide the fate of the kingdom. Imagine this: King Roderick, the last in a line of Visigothic rulers, facing off against Tariq's forces. Roderic's reign had been marked by a lack of cohesion, with rival factions among the Visigothic nobility undermining his authority. As the battle commenced, these divisions proved fatal. The Visigothic forces, lacking a unified command and suffering from defections, crumbled under the pressure. The outcome was less a battle and more a rout, with Roderick himself reportedly meeting his end in the chaos, his body lost to the annals of history like a misplaced set of keys. The fall of Roderick marked the beginning of the end for the Visigothic kingdom. In the wake of Guadalete, Muslim forces swept across Iberia like a tidal wave, capturing key cities with alarming speed. Within a few years, the once mighty Visigothic kingdom had been reduced to a few isolated holdouts as the Muslim rule extended over the peninsula. The speed of this conquest was a testament to the internal rot that had plagued the Visigoths for years. Their kingdom had been a house built on sand, and when the tide came in, it washed away with little resistance. So, what does this all mean for the legacy of the Visigoths? Well, for one, their story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of internal division and the perils of ignoring external threats. The Visigoths had once been a force to be reckoned with, sacking Rome and carving out a kingdom in Iberia. But over time, their inability to maintain unity and adapt to changing circumstances became their undoing. They were like a rock band that couldn't keep it together long enough to avoid becoming a one-hit wonder. Yet, despite their fall, the Visigoths left an indelible mark on the history of Spain. Their legacy lived on in the legal and administrative systems they established, which would influence the region long after their kingdom had crumbled. The Visigothic Code, with its blend of Roman law and Gothic customs, became a cornerstone for later legal developments in medieval Spain. And let's not forget their role in shaping the cultural tapestry of Iberia, a mix of Gothic, Roman, and Christian influences that laid the groundwork for the rich, diverse culture that would flourish in the centuries to come. In a way, the Visigoths were both architects and victims of their own destiny. They built a kingdom, but their failure to adapt and unify in the face of new challenges spelled their downfall. Their story is a reminder that history is not just a series of events, but a complex web of human actions and consequences. The Visigoths' rise and fall highlight the importance of adaptability and unity, lessons that resonate just as strongly today as they did in the medieval world. As we wrap up this chapter of the Visigothic saga, let's take a moment to reflect on the quirky, chaotic, and ultimately cautionary tale of a kingdom that rose from the ashes of Rome, only to be swept away by the sands of time. The Visigoths may be gone, but their story is far from forgotten, a testament to the enduring impact of history and a reminder that even the mightiest of kingdoms can crumble if they fail to learn from their past. So, dear listeners, as you drift off to sleep, remember, the past is always with us, shaping our present and guiding our future, one cautionary tale at a time. In the grand tapestry of England's history, Richard Roman III emerges as one of those figures whose life story reads like a script for a medieval soap opera. Born on October 2, 1452, at Fotheringhay Castle, a place as quaint as its name suggests, young Richard entered a world where family gatherings had more dramatic tension than a reality TV reunion. The Wars of the Roses were in full swing, a dynastic struggle where the throne was essentially England's hardest potato, tossed between the Lancaster and York families with all the grace of a bar fight. Now, Fotheringhay Castle might sound like the perfect setting for a cozy childhood, but let's not kid ourselves. Richard's early years were anything but idyllic. His father, Richard Plantagenet, Duke of York, was a key player in the struggle for the English crown, and the stakes were higher than a Tudor courtier's hat. This wasn't a family dispute over who gets the best bedroom. This was about who gets to rule a kingdom. And let's remember, in those days, losing a political argument could also mean losing your head. As the youngest of 12 siblings, yes, 12, because medieval parents were basically trying to form their own football teams, Richard had to find his place in a family where alliances were as shifting as the English weather. His brothers, Edward and George, were already making names for themselves, and not always in ways that would make a mother proud. Edward, for instance, would eventually become King Edward Roman IV, known for his military prowess, and let's not sugarcoat it, his notorious womanizing. George, on the other hand, had a knack for picking the wrong side, a talent that would eventually earn him a date with a barrel of Malmsey wine. More on that delightful tale later. Richard's early education was as much about learning to dodge political daggers as it was about mastering Latin conjugations. He was tutored by some of the brightest minds of the time, which, considering the era, meant they probably knew how to read and write without too many spelling errors. But the real lessons came from the cutthroat world of medieval politics, where you learned quickly that trust was a commodity rarer than a warm English summer. The Wars of the Roses set the backdrop for Richard's formative years, a conflict that started in 1455 and dragged on like a medieval version of a family feud reality show until 1487. This was a time when allegiances shifted faster than a knight could draw his sword, and survival meant keeping your friends close and your enemies closer, preferably with a healthy contingent of armed guards. Richard's father, the Duke of York, had a claim to the throne that was as legitimate as a medieval claim could be, which is to say, open to interpretation and rife with genealogical gymnastics. By 1460, the Duke of York was named heir to the throne, only to have his ambitions cut short at the Battle of Wakefield. There he met a rather grisly end, his head displayed on a pike with a paper crown markingly perched on top. It was the medieval equivalent of a public diss track, and for young Richard, a brutal introduction to the consequences of political ambition. Despite, or perhaps because of, these early hardships, Richard grew up to be a skilled military commander and a staunch supporter of his brother Edward. When Edward seized the throne in 1461, Richard was right there by his side, proving that family loyalty could sometimes survive even the most lethal of court intrigues. By the time Richard was 18, he was leading armies and governing vast swaths of northern England, which makes you question what you were doing with your life at that age. The political landscape of 15th century England was a relentless game of chess, only instead of pawns and rooks, the pieces were actual human lives, and checkmate could mean a swift trip to the scaffold. Richard's early life was shaped by these brutal realities, where strategic marriages were forged, powerful alliances were crafted, and betrayal was as common as a cold English drizzle. It was a time when even the most innocent-looking feast could turn into a bloodbath, and trust was a luxury few could afford. Living through such tumultuous times, Richard learned the art of survival in England's most dangerous game. His upbringing was a masterclass in medieval politics, teaching him to be both a loyal brother and a formidable adversary. It set the stage for a life that would be marked by power struggles, regal ambitions, and a legacy that would be debated for centuries. But for now, he was just a young nobleman trying to navigate a world where kings and queens seemed as likely to lose their heads as to keep their crowns. As Richard matured into a seasoned nobleman, the stage was set for his ascent to power, a journey that would make the most tangled soap opera plot seem straightforward. England was still reeling from the Wars of the Roses, where switching sides was more common than changing shirts. Richard's brother Edward Roman IV had managed to snag the throne, providing a brief respite from the chaos, but ruling a country wasn't all feasts and jousting tournaments. Edward's reign was a constant juggling act of keeping both the nobility and his waistline in check. In 1483, Edward Roman IV took a permanent leave of absence from ruling. Translation: he died unexpectedly at the age of 40. This threw the country into a political blender set on high. Edward's eldest son, a 12-year-old boy also named Edward, was the heir apparent. But a preteen king, it sounded as practical as a chocolate teapot. Cue Richard, the loyal brother and the ultimate embodiment of the phrase right place, right time, stepping into the role of Lord Protector, a position that sounds as robust as it did precarious. Now, let's talk about the princes in the tower, because oh boy, is this where history takes a dark turn down a dimly lit corridor. Young Edward V and his brother Richard, Duke of York, were lodged in the Tower of London, officially for protection. The Tower, despite its menacing reputation, was a royal residence as much as a fortress. But spoiler alert, the boys vanished, leaving a mystery thicker than a bowl of medieval porridge. Who done it? Conventional wisdom has pointed the finger squarely at Uncle Richard. But was he really the villain in chief, or just a medieval scapegoat? Let's unpack this with some hard facts and a sprinkle of skepticism. First, the practicalities. Richard's path to the crown involved discrediting his nephew's legitimacy. How? By declaring Edward Roman IV marriage invalid due to a pre-existing betrothal, effectively labeling the boys as illegitimate. This was a legal maneuver as slippery as an eel, but it worked. On June 26, 1483, Richard was crowned King Richard Roman III. Yet, the disappearance of the princes left a stain on his reputation that no amount of royal pomp could wash away. The prince's vanishing act is one of history's favorite unsolved mysteries, with theories as diverse as the medieval court itself. Richard had motive, sure, but let's not forget the other players in this Game of Thrones. The Duke of Buckingham, Richard's erstwhile ally, had ambitions as grand as his titles, and the Lancastrian faction was forever lurking, ready to pounce on any Yorkist misstep. In short, the court was a who's who of potential culprits, each with a vested interest in Richard's downfall. Economically, Richard's reign was a mixed bag. He instituted reforms that were surprisingly progressive for a monarch often caricatured as a hunchbacked villain. He introduced the Court of Requests, which allowed the poor to have their grievances heard, a move that was as revolutionary as it was necessary. He also improved the administration of justice and took steps to regulate the burgeoning wool trade, which was England's economic lifeline. But these efforts were overshadowed by the ominous cloud of the missing princes and the general perception that Richard's grip on power was as tenuous as the English weather was unpredictable. In the court of public opinion, Richard's image took a battering worse than a ship in a storm. The Tudor propaganda machine, led by Henry Tudor, soon to be Henry Roman VII, went into overdrive, painting Richard as the ultimate villain. This narrative was as meticulously crafted as a courtly tapestry, yet the reality was likely more nuanced. Was Richard a power-hungry despot, or merely a monarch trying to maintain order in a kingdom perpetually on the brink of chaos? The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the middle. The economic stakes during Richard's brief reign were significant. England, a relatively small player on the European stage, was reliant on trade, particularly of wool and cloth. Richard's policies aimed at stabilizing and promoting this trade, though his efforts were constantly undermined by the political instability that dogged his rule. And while his domestic reforms were noteworthy, they were largely overshadowed by the relentless march of Tudor ambition. As Richard struggled to maintain his grip on the crown, the political intrigue continued to swirl around him. The Lancastrian forces, led by Henry Tudor, were gathering across the Channel, eyeing the English throne like a hungry wolf. Richard's reign was a precarious balancing act, one misstep away from disaster. In the end, his legacy would be shaped not just by his policies, but by the enduring mystery of the princes and the relentless spin of the Tudor narrative machine. Richard's rise and fall were as swift as they were dramatic, leaving us with questions that have tantalized historians for centuries. Was he a Machiavellian schemer, or a misunderstood ruler caught in the crosshairs of history's machinations? The debate is as lively today as it was over 5 centuries ago, proving that when it comes to Richard Roman III, the line between legend and reality is as blurred as ever. As we leave Richard wrestling with the reins of power, remember this: history is written by the victors, and in Richard's case, those victors were the Tudors. But the story isn't over yet, and the next act promises to be just as tumultuous, with battles looming on the horizon and a kingdom's future hanging by a thread. So stay tuned, because the saga of Richard Roman III is far from finished. As Richard Roman III grappled with the weight of England's crown, the kingdom teetered on the edge of a historical cliff, daring anyone to push it over. Now, being king wasn't just about wearing a fancy hat and waving a scepter. It was like juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. Sure, Richard had nabbed the throne through a series of convoluted political gymnastics, but holding on to it, that was the real challenge, akin to keeping a candle lit in the midst of a gale. Let's dive into one of the less glamorous aspects of Richard's reign, the economy. Picture medieval England as a giant woolly sheep. No, not your ex-boyfriend's sweater, but the real kind. Wool was the lifeblood of the English economy, the Bitcoin of the Middle Ages, if you will. Richard knew this and took steps to bolster the wool trade, attempting to keep the coffers of England from echoing like a pauper's pantry. However, the economy wasn't the only thing Richard was trying to keep afloat. He was also navigating the choppy waters of medieval tax policies, which were about as popular as a wet blanket at a campfire. Richard's tax policies were basically the medieval equivalent of today's hotly debated fiscal plans. He aimed to ease the burden on the common folk by abolishing certain taxes and reducing others, a move that was as welcome as finding a gold coin in your Christmas pudding. But let's not crown him the Robin Hood of the 15th century just yet. These policies were as much about winning support as they were about economic fairness. After all, a happy populace was less likely to join rebellions or, try to depose you. Speaking of rebellions, Richard was quite the reformer when it came to law and order. He established the Court of Requests, a kind of medieval small claims court, which allowed the grievances of the poor to be heard. Imagine Judge Judy, but with more chainmail and fewer commercial breaks. This was a progressive move, especially for a time when justice often depended on how much you could bribe the judge or how many swords you had at your disposal, while Richard was busy trying to make England a better place for the average Joe, or perhaps the average John. He faced a public relations nightmare that would make even the savviest spin doctor cringe. The mystery of the princes in the Tower loomed like a Gothic spectre over his reign, casting a shadow darker than the London fog. The disappearance of his young nephews was the medieval equivalent of a PR crisis gone viral. It didn't help that Richard's physical appearance, thanks to Shakespeare's later portrayal, was seen as a reflection of his inner villainy, the original case of don't judge a book by its crooked spine. Richard's reign was also characterized by his attempts to stabilize the currency, a task that was as tricky as trying to keep a medieval banquet from descending into a food fight. Inflation was a persistent problem, and Richard sought to introduce reforms that would maintain the value of the English coin, ensuring that it didn't end up worth less than a fig leaf in winter. Despite these efforts, the economy remained a complex beast, unpredictable as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. On the domestic front, Richard also aimed to curb the power of the nobility, a group whose ambition was only matched by their ability to switch allegiances faster than you could say treason. He implemented laws to prevent the illegal retaining of private armies by the lords, a practice that had turned the English countryside into something of a medieval Wild West. By doing so, Richard hoped to ensure that the only army in England was his, a strategic move to prevent any impromptu coups from his ambitious peers. Yet, for all his efforts, Richard's grip on power was tenuous at best. His reforms, though noteworthy, were often overshadowed by the relentless march of Tudor propaganda. Henry Tudor, wading in the wings across the Channel, was like a cat watching a bird with a broken wing, ready to pounce at the first sign of weakness. Richard's reign was a precarious balancing act, with each day bringing new challenges and old fears. Richard Roman III legacy is a testament to the power of narrative. Despite his attempts at reform and governance, his reign is often remembered more for its controversies than its achievements. Was Richard a ruthless tyrant or a misunderstood monarch caught in the vicious whirlpool of history? The truth, like the man himself, is complex, a tapestry woven with threads of both light and shadow. As we leave Richard to face the gathering storm, remember this. History is a fickle mistress, and the tales she tells are often more about those who write them than those who live them. With the Tudors circling like vultures, the saga of Richard Roman III promises more twists and turns than a medieval tourney. Stay tuned, because the next chapter is bound to be as riveting as a joust at high noon. As Richard Roman III stood on the precipice of his final act, the stage was set for a showdown more climactic than a medieval jousting tournament. Into the Battle of Bosworth Field, 1485, a date that would become etched in history like a knight's sword in stone. Was this battle the dramatic crescendo Shakespeare penned, or more of a botched attempt at battlefield domination? Spoiler: the truth is a tangled web of strategy, missteps, and plain old bad luck. Picture a field in Leicestershire, where the English countryside's rolling hills were about to witness a clash that would decide the fate of a kingdom. On one side, Richard Roman III, the last Plantagenet king, with about 10,000 men at his command. Not exactly an army to sneeze at, but in medieval warfare, numbers weren't the only game in town. On the other side, Henry Tudor, the upstart contender with a claim to the throne as thin as a peasant's gruel, rallying around 5, 1,000 troops. A bit of a David and Goliath scenario, except this Goliath had a few stones in his boots. Now, let's talk logistics. Unlike Hollywood's sweeping battle scenes, medieval warfare was more akin to a chess match where someone occasionally flipped the board. Richard positioned his forces with the skill of a seasoned commander, and he wasn't just any medieval leader. He had a reputation as a formidable warrior. His centre was commanded by the Duke of Norfolk, while the flanks were led by the Earl of Northumberland. But here's the kicker. Richard's plan relied heavily on loyalty and timing, commodities more fickle than a cat's affection. Enter the infamous charge, a move as bold as it was reckless. Richard, seeing an opportunity to end the battle swiftly, decided to make a direct assault on Henry himself. This wasn't just a tactical decision. It was a roll of the dice with England's crown as the prize. Richard's charge became the stuff of legend, desperate gambit, reminiscent of a high-stakes poker game where the chips were made of crowns and thrones. But let's not romanticize. The charge was less about gallant heroism and more about a last-ditch effort in a rapidly deteriorating situation. The battlefield was a chaotic mess of mud, blood, and betrayal. Richard's cavalry cut through Henry's ranks like a hot knife through butter, but just as victory seemed within grasp, the wheel of fortune spun out of his favor. In a twist worthy of a medieval soap opera, Lord Stanley, Richard's supposed ally, switched sides at the 11th hour, throwing his support behind Henry. Stanley's forces, initially standing aloof like spectators at a football match, suddenly decided the outcome by siding with the Tudors. This betrayal was as shocking as finding a vegan at a medieval feast, and it turned the tide faster than you could say treason. This brings us to one of history's favorite sound bites. Richard's alleged cry of a horse, my kingdom for a horse. Now, whether Richard actually uttered these words or if Shakespeare took some creative liberties, we'll never know. But the sentiment captures the chaos of the moment. Richard, unhorsed and surrounded, fighting valiantly until the very end. His death marked the conclusion of the Plantagenet dynasty and the dawn of Tudor rule. Richard's body was found, stripped of armor and dignity, brought to Leicester to be displayed like some grim trophy. The economic cost of the battle was immense, not just in terms of lives lost, estimated at around 1,000, but in the ripple effect it had on the kingdom's stability. The transition of power was as smooth as a medieval alehouse brawl, with Henry Tudor quickly securing the throne as Henry Roman VII. The aftermath of Bosworth Field was a lesson in historical narrative. The Tudors, masters of propaganda, painted Richard as the quintessential villain, a hunchbacked tyrant whose demise was both just and inevitable. Shakespeare later immortalized this view, crafting a character whose spine was as twisted as his soul was purported to be. But peel back the layers of Tudor spin, and you find a more nuanced figure, a king caught in the relentless gears of history. In the court of public opinion, Richard has been both vilified and vindicated, testament to the power of storytelling. Was he a victim of circumstance, or a player in his own tragic downfall? The answer, like a medieval tapestry, is woven with threads of both truth and fiction. As Richard's reign ended on that fateful field, England entered a new era under the Tudors. The economic and political landscape shifted like sand, with Henry Roman VII ushering in reforms that would reshape the kingdom. But the shadow of Richard Roman III loomed large, a reminder that history is often written by those who emerge victorious. So, was Richard's fall at Bosworth Field the dramatic climax of Shakespearean lore, or merely a military debacle? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between, a blend of myth and reality that continues to captivate historians and enthusiasts alike. As we look ahead to the next chapter in this historical saga, remember, the echoes of Bosworth still resonate, a testament to the enduring legacy of a king whose story is far from finished. As the dust settled on Bosworth Field, the echoes of clashing swords faded into the annals of history, leaving behind the enigmatic shadow of Richard Roman III. His story is a testament to the enduring power of myth-making, where reality is often reshaped by the victors and retold with a dramatic flair that rivals any epic tale. Richard's legacy, much like his life, is a mosaic of contradictions and complexities, piecing together a portrait that challenges the narrative spun by the Tudors and immortalized by Shakespeare. Let's start with the villainous caricature that Shakespeare painted for us. His Richard Roman III is the quintessential bad guy, conniving, ruthless, and deformed in both body and soul. But here's the kicker. This portrayal is less about historical accuracy and more about dramatic license. Shakespeare was writing in the late 16th century, under the reign of Elizabeth I, a Tudor. So, naturally, his work reflected the prevailing Tudor narrative, one that had every incentive to cast Richard in the worst possible light. After all, nothing says legitimate rule quite like demonizing your predecessor. The truth about Richard's physical appearance is far more nuanced. Recent archaeological discoveries, particularly the 2012 unearthing of his remains under a Leicester car park, revealed he did have scoliosis, which would have caused some asymmetry in his shoulders. But let's bust the myth right here. He wasn't the Quasimodo-like figure of legend. In fact, contemporary accounts describe him as a capable warrior and a charismatic leader, though clearly not without ambition or a penchant for political maneuvering. Speaking of political maneuvering, Richard's ascent to the throne and subsequent reign were marked by a series of shrewd, albeit ruthless, decisions, declaring his nephews illegitimate and assuming the crown was a move straight out of the Machiavellian playbook. But in the cutthroat world of medieval politics, where betrayals were as common as mead at a banquet, Richard was far from alone in his machinations. His actions were typical of a time when the throne was a prize for the boldest, not the meekest. Economically, Richard's reign, though short-lived, left an indelible mark. He understood the importance of trade and sought to bolster England's economic standing, particularly through the wool industry. His attempts to stabilize the currency were ahead of their time, aiming to curb inflation and ensure that the English pound didn't end up as worthless as a jester's promises. These policies, though largely overshadowed by the political turmoil of his reign, highlight a king with a vision for a prosperous realm, a far cry from the one-dimensional tyrant of Tudor propaganda. But let's not kid ourselves. Richard wasn't exactly King Arthur. He was a man of his times, which means he played the game of thrones with all the ruthlessness it demanded. His downfall at Bosworth was as much a result of his own missteps as it was the cunning of Henry Tudor and the betrayal by supposed allies like Lord Stanley. The fickle nature of medieval loyalties was a harsh reality that Richard, despite his acumen, couldn't overcome. In the court of public opinion, Richard's reputation has undergone significant rehabilitation in recent decades. The discovery of his remains and subsequent analysis has sparked renewed interest in his life and reign, leading to a more balanced view that acknowledges both his flaws and his achievements. Modern historians are peeling back the layers of Tudor propaganda to reveal a monarch who was neither the villain nor the hero, but something far more interesting, a complex human being navigating the treacherous waters of power. The appeal of Richard Roman III's story lies in its duality, the juxtaposition of the romantic legend with the gritty reality. His life was a tapestry of ambition, loyalty, betrayal, and redemption, woven together with threads of both triumph and tragedy. It's a story that continues to captivate us because it reflects the timeless nature of power and the human condition. In Richard, we see a reflection of our own struggles for identity, legacy, and justice, making his tale as relevant today as it was over 5 centuries ago. In the grand scheme of history, Richard's legacy is a reminder of the power of narrative. The tales we tell and the myths we create shape our understanding of the past, often blurring the line between fact and fiction. Richard Roman III's story challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question the narratives handed down to us, and to seek a deeper understanding of the people and events that have shaped our world. As we wrap up this journey through Richard's tumultuous life, let's leave with this thought. History is rarely black and white, and the figures who inhabit its pages are not mere caricatures, but complex individuals with dreams, ambitions, and flaws. Richard Roman III remains an enigmatic figure, not because he was a villain or a hero, but because he was profoundly human. And in the end, it is this very humanity that makes his story worth telling. So, as you reflect on the life and legacy of England's last Plantagenet king, remember that the past is a living narrative, ever evolving and always open to reinterpretation. And who knows, maybe one day we'll find ourselves revisiting Richard Roman III yet again, uncovering new truths and gaining fresh insights into this fascinating chapter of history. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and above all, keep the spirit of curiosity alive. Because in the world of history, there's always more to discover, and the adventure never truly ends. Long before the March civilization got its act together and started leaving behind jaw-dropping ceramics and pyramids, there was the land itself, a harsh, unforgiving stretch of territory that had to be wrestled into submission. The stage was set in northern Peru, where the Andes Mountains decided to throw a temper tantrum and crash into the Pacific Ocean. This collision created a series of narrow coastal valleys and plains that would eventually become the March's stomping grounds. And just like a millennial trying to make it in a big city, the March had to get creative with what they had. Now, let's not kid ourselves with the idea that civilizations just sprout from the earth like daisies. The March didn't wake up one morning, yawn, and decide to start a civilization. No, they had to dig in, literally. We're talking about a landscape that was a mix of fertile valleys and bone-dry deserts, with rivers stubbornly refusing to cooperate by flowing at predictable intervals. In a place where Mother Nature seemed to have a bit of a split personality, the March were like the original DIY enthusiasts, turning chaos into order. These folks didn't have access to Home Depot or YouTube tutorials on irrigation. Instead, they had ingenuity and a whole lot of grit. They transformed the landscape using a system of canals and aqueducts, effectively playing ancient water whisperers. The March took the waters from the rivers that tumbled down from the Andes and channeled them into their fields. This wasn't a weekend project either. It took centuries of trial and error, with each generation adding to the work of the last. We're talking about engineering that would make even today's city planners nod in approval. The March's agricultural prowess was legendary. In a time when the average human was still trying to figure out how to make a decent sandwich, the March were growing crops like maize, beans, and peanuts. And they weren't just growing enough to survive. They were producing surpluses, which allowed them to build a society that could afford to have artisans, priests, and even a few folks who did nothing but think about the meaning of life. Not too shabby for people who lived in a place where nature seemed determined to keep them on their toes. Now, let's address the romantic idea that these ancient civilizations were somehow more in tune with nature. Sure, they worked with the land, but they also manipulated it. They didn't just wait for the rains to come. They made the rains come to them. This wasn't some primal dance of harmony with the earth. It was more like a strategic negotiation, with the March coming out on top most of the time. But let's not pretend they didn't have their share of droughts and famines. Mother Nature's sense of humor was as twisted back then as it is today. Of course, all this agricultural innovation wasn't just about feeding the masses. It was about power. Control the food, and you control the people. The March knew this, and they built their society around this principle. Their leaders were often seen as semi-divine figures, part priest, part farmer, and part ruler. It's a classic case of the elite using their knowledge and resources to maintain control, a tactic as old as time and as enduring as a politician's promise. So, while it might be tempting to think of the March as idyllic agrarian philosophers, the truth is far more complex and, frankly, interesting. They were a society that thrived on innovation, exploitation of resources, and a fair bit of luck. They transformed a seemingly inhospitable environment into the cradle of one of the most fascinating civilizations of the ancient world. And all this from a bunch of valleys and plains that, at first glance, didn't seem like much. But isn't that the way with the best stories? They often come from the most unlikely of places, and the March are no exception. The March didn't just engineer water systems, they engineered society. Their political structure was like an elaborate game of chess, where the March lords played both king and bishop. These guys weren't just power brokers. They were the rock stars of their day, with religion as their hit single. Picture a world where wearing the right headdress didn't just make you the life of the party, it made you the voice of the gods. In March society, power and religion were as inseparable as peanut butter and jelly. The March lords, often decorated with more bling than a modern-day pop star, were seen as semi-divine. They didn't just rule. They were the living embodiment of celestial power, walking the line between deity and dictator. This wasn't just a quaint belief. It was the glue that held their society together. Think of it like the ancient version of a PR campaign, where mixing politics with divine approval was the secret source for control. March weren't shy about flaunting their theocratic rule either. Ceremonies were events of epic proportions, complete with processions that would make a royal wedding look like a backyard barbecue. These events were meticulously orchestrated, with costumes and rituals that spoke to a society steeped in symbolism and spectacle. We're talking about ritual sacrifices, too. Not exactly a theme for a family-friendly parade, but certainly an effective way to keep folks in line. Human sacrifices were a grim reminder of the March's belief in maintaining cosmic order through bloodshed, a tradition that's both fascinating and chilling in equal measure. But let's not romanticize this into some harmonious utopia where everyone sang Cumbare under the Peruvian sun. Archaeological evidence tells a different story, one that includes class divisions as sharp as a ceremonial blade. The March elite lived in sprawling complexes, adorned with the finest pottery and textiles, while the common folk slogged through daily life with nary a golden goblet in sight. Food, riches, and status weren't just unevenly distributed. They were the bedrock of a society as stratified as a layer cake. Power struggles were not only common, but expected. You see, when you mix divine rule with human ambition, you get a volatile cocktail of intrigue and betrayal. The March Lords didn't just have to worry about pleasing the gods. They had to keep an eye on their rivals, who were as eager to ascend the throne as a cat eyeing an unattended roast chicken. This was Game of Thrones, but with more llamas and fewer dragons. Interestingly, the March capitalized on their elaborate ceremonies as a means of maintaining power. These events weren't just about showing off. They were an essential part of the political toolkit. By keeping the populace in awe, and perhaps a little fearful, the March elite reinforced their status at the top of the social pyramid. It's a tale as old as civilization itself. Keep the people entertained and distracted, and you can rule with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. And let's not forget about the role of economics in all this. Control over agricultural surpluses meant control over people, and the lords were nothing if not savvy economists. They understood that a well-fed society was a stable society, or at least one less likely to revolt. By distributing food during times of scarcity, they wielded power not just through divine favor, but through the very real, very tangible grip on the resources that sustained life. The archaeological digs have unearthed enough grave goods to make a pharaoh blush. From jewelry to elaborate ceramics, these artifacts speak volumes about a society where wealth was concentrated in the hands of the few. Yet, the March were a paradox, a civilization that celebrated communal rituals while reinforcing rigid social hierarchies. It's a reminder that human nature is often contradictory, driven by both a desire for unity and an instinct for dominance. So, while it's tempting to think of the March as a mystical, harmonious civilization, the truth is more nuanced. They were a society built on power, prestige, and the practicalities of survival, with a theocratic twist. As we peel back the layers of this ancient culture, we discover a world that's as complex and compelling as any modern political drama. The March remind us that history is never as simple as it seems, and that beneath every legend lies a reality waiting to be uncovered. And speaking of complexities, let's dive headfirst into the March's artistic legacy. Hold onto your hats, because these guys were like the Michelangelos of the Andes, minus the frescoes, and plus a whole lot of pottery. Seriously, the March were the original ceramic wizards, and their pottery wasn't just for holding grandma's flowers. Nope, it was an intricate tapestry of life, death, and everything in between, all artfully sculpted and painted onto clay. We're talking about thousands of pottery pieces, each a snapshot of March society, spanning from around 100 to 700 AD. Now, if you're picturing some quaint clay jugs with cute little motifs, think again. The March ceramics were a visual encyclopedia of their beliefs and daily life, rich with symbolism and detail. These folks took pottery to the next level, using it as a medium to depict everything from the mundane to the mystical. They crafted vessels in the shapes of animals, plants, and people, often with such realism that you'd swear they had a secret time machine for studying anatomy. And the themes? Oh, they covered the whole gamut: warriors, priests, guards, and even a bit of March erotica, because why not? But let's not get too swept away by the romance of it all. This wasn't just about art for art's sake. The March used their pottery as a sort of ancient Instagram. sharing stories, rituals, and sometimes just a good old-fashioned flex of power. These ceramics were often found in tombs, serving as grave goods for the elite. They were status symbols, as much about showing off wealth and power as they were about artistic expression. It's like the ancient equivalent of driving a Lamborghini through a village of bicycles. Subtlety wasn't exactly on the menu. Speaking of tombs, let's delve into the famous March burial sites, which are like archaeological jackpots. Take the Lord of Sipan, a tomb so loaded with treasures that it's been dubbed the Tutankhamun of the Americas. Unearthed in 1987, it revealed a March ruler buried with a bevy of ornate jewelry, headdresses, and, of course, exquisite pottery. These artifacts weren't just for show. They were a testament to the March's belief in the afterlife, a world where status mattered just as much as it did among the living. And then there's the monumental architecture. The March were no slackers when it came to building big. They constructed massive adobe pyramids, like the Huaca del Sol and Huaca de la Luna, which still stand today as silent witnesses to their architectural prowess. These pyramids weren't just fancy mausoleums. They were the epicenters of ceremonial life, where rituals and sacrifices took place. Imagine a bustling hub of activity, with priests performing complex ceremonies atop these structures, while the common folk gathered below, watching with a mix of reverence and maybe a hint of dread. But before we get too misty-eyed about these grand edifices, let's bust a myth or two. The March's architectural achievements were impressive, but they weren't uniform. Regional variations were the name of the game, as different March communities put their unique spin on construction. The Huaca del Sol, for example, was built using a staggering 140 million adobe bricks, but other sites might have opted for smaller, less imposing structures. This wasn't a one-size-fits-all civilization. It was a mosaic of cultural expressions, each region adding its own flair to the March tapestry. This brings us to another common misconception, the idea of a monolithic March culture. In reality, March society was as diverse as its geography. The different valleys along the northern coast of Peru each had their own March flavor, influenced by local traditions and environmental factors. The art and architecture varied from region to region, reflecting the local resources and social dynamics. It's like the difference between New York pizza and Chicago deep dish. Same fundamental concept, but wildly different in execution. So, while it's tempting to think of the March as a unified cultural entity, the truth is a bit messier, and frankly, more intriguing. This patchwork of regional diversity speaks volumes about the adaptability and ingenuity of the March people. They weren't just cookie-cutter copies of each other. They were innovators, each community finding its own way to thrive in a challenging landscape. And let's not forget the symbols and motifs that adorned their artifacts. March art was rich with iconography, each symbol a piece of a larger puzzle that told the story of their beliefs and values. From depictions of the decapitator god, a deity with an unsettling penchant for heads, to scenes of mythical sea creatures, these images were more than just decorative. They were visual narratives, conveying messages about power, religion, and the cosmos. The March's artistic expressions were also a reflection of their social hierarchy. The symbols found in elite context, like tombs and temples, often emphasized themes of authority and divine rule, reinforcing the status quo. Meanwhile, everyday artifacts might feature more humble designs, focusing on agricultural motifs or simple geometric patterns. This artistic stratification mirrored the social divisions present in March society, underscoring the unequal distribution of wealth and power. So, as we sift through the remnants of March civilization, we uncover a world as complex and layered as the ceramics they left behind. It's a civilization where art, politics, and religion were intertwined, each influencing the other in a dance as intricate as the motifs on a march part. And while the romantic image of a harmonious, unified March culture is appealing, the reality is far more nuanced. It's a story of diversity, adaptability, and the enduring human drive to create meaning in a chaotic world. As we wrap up this part of our journey through March history, remember that there's still more to explore. We've only just begun to unravel the mysteries of this fascinating civilization, with its artistic wonders and architectural feats. In the next part, we'll delve deeper into the March's political machinations and the challenges they faced as a society on the rise. Until then, keep pondering the intricate dance of history, where every artifact tells a story, and every story reveals a new layer of the human experience. Now, let's shift gears from the March's artistic flair and dive deep into the practical, gritty world of economics, the engine room of any civilization. The March, like savvy entrepreneurs, weren't just about creating pretty parts and grand ceremonies. They were also masters of making the most out of what their environment offered. And when I say making the most, I mean transforming their patch of northern Peru into a thriving hub of agricultural innovation and trade that would make even modern-day economists raise an eyebrow. First things first, let's talk irrigation. You might recall those nifty canals and aqueducts we mentioned earlier. Well, they weren't just for show. These were the veins that pumped life into the March economy. By cleverly diverting water from the Andes, the March turned arid land into fertile fields, a bit like ancient alchemists turning dust into gold, except the gold here was maize, beans, and cotton. And if you think that's impressive, consider this. Some of these irrigation systems stretched over 100 miles, a feat of engineering prowess that would have most of us throwing up our hands and calling a plumber. But why stop at feeding themselves? The March knew that a good harvest wasn't just about survival. It was about power and influence. With their irrigation systems in place, they produced agricultural surpluses, allowing them to trade with neighboring groups. And here's where things get interesting. The March didn't just barter for trinkets and baubles. They were in the big leagues, trading for exotic goods like spondylus shells from Ecuador and precious metals from the highlands. These commodities weren't just pretty. They were status symbols, the ancient equivalent of driving a Rolls-Royce through a village of horse-drawn carts. Trade was the March's version of global networking, expanding their influence beyond their immediate territory. Picture ancient trade routes crisscrossing the region, with March traders hustling their wares, and haggling like it was the flea market of the guards. They were part of a vibrant exchange network that connected cultures and ideas, laying the groundwork for a complex society that thrived on both local ingenuity and external connections. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. Trade and agriculture, as much as they were the lifeblood of the March, were also fraught with challenges. You see, a society that hinges on agricultural surpluses is only as stable as its weather. When the rains were kind and the sun shone just right, life was good. But throw in a little climate change, and things could go south faster than you can say El Niño. In fact, some scholars believe that recurring El Niño events, a climate pattern that brings heavy rains and subsequent droughts, played a significant role in the March's downfall. Picture this. Your meticulously planned irrigation system is suddenly overwhelmed by torrential floods, wiping out crops and causing chaos. And just when you think you've weathered the storm, a drought follows, turning your fields into dust bowls. It's like Mother Nature's version of a sucker punch, and the March felt every brutal hit. These environmental challenges exposed the fragility of a society so heavily reliant on agriculture. When the crops failed, so did the March's economic engine. And with a faltering economy, the delicate social and political structures of the March came under strain. Those divine right rulers who once seemed invincible, suddenly, they didn't look so godlike when their subjects were hungry and restless. The March's reliance on trade also had its pitfalls. As their power and influence grew, so did the competition. Neighboring societies weren't just passive participants in this economic game. They were rivals, jockeying for position and resources. Trade networks, while they connected the March to distant lands, also brought conflict to their doorstep. It was a precarious balancing act, maintaining alliances while fending off would-be conquerors. But let's not pretend the March were just victims of circumstance. They were savvy operators who adapted to challenges as best they could, using their wits and resources to maintain their position. However, even the most cunning strategies have their limits, particularly when faced with forces beyond human control. The March's story is a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of ancient peoples, but also a sobering reminder of the limits of human agency in the face of nature's whims. As we ponder the rise and fall of the March, it's tempting to see them as a cautionary tale, a civilization that soared on the wings of innovation, only to be grounded by the harsh realities of climate and competition. They remind us that the forces that build a society can also be its undoing. a delicate dance of creation and destruction that echoes through the ages. Yet, the March's legacy endures, not just in the ruins of their cities or the pottery in museums, but in the lessons they offer about the complexities of human civilization. They were architects of a world that thrived on the interplay of art, power, and economics, a world that was as vibrant and multifaceted as any society today. As we continue to unravel their story, we do so with a sense of awe and a touch of humility, acknowledging that even the most advanced civilizations are but a few bad harvests away from crisis. And so, as we wrap up this exploration of March economics, keep in mind that the story is far from over. We've only begun to scratch the surface of their intricate world, and there's much more to uncover in the next part of our journey, a deeper dive into the political machinations and social dynamics that shape the March civilization. So, stay tuned, because the best parts of history are always just around the corner, waiting to be discovered. Speaking of the political machinations and social dynamics that shape the March civilization, let's not mince words. The March were a society on the edge, balancing power like a tightrope walker on a windy day. We've discussed their economic savvy, but now it's time to dive into the nitty-gritty of their political life. A world where intrigue was as thick as the adobe walls of their pyramids. Now, before you start picturing a March version of a UN summit, let's get real. The March political landscape was more akin to a medieval court, rife with alliances and betrayals, with a dash of divine mandate to spice things up. Their society was segmented into a series of chiefdoms, each ruled by a warrior elite who didn't just govern, they performed. These leaders were the rock stars of their age, decked out in ornate regalia, parading their power in ceremonies that were as much about political theater as they were about religious duty. And here's the kicker. The March Lords weren't just local celebrities. They were believed to be semi-divine. This wasn't just a job title, it was a job description. They were expected to intercede with the guards to ensure the community's prosperity, and failing to do so could mean losing more than just their office. It could mean losing their heads. Literally, because when the crops failed and the rivers dried up, the people wanted answers, and sometimes those answers required a change in leadership. But it wasn't just the whims of the guards that the March had to worry about. Internal conflicts were as much a part of March life as pottery and pyramids. Archaeological evidence points to signs of warfare and violence, suggesting that rival factions within the March world often didn't see eye to eye. Imagine a game of musical chairs, but with thrones. Everyone's scrambling for a seat, and no one's above a little skullduggery to get one. Evidence of fortifications and warrior burials suggests that these power struggles were no polite disagreements over tea. They were bloody, brutal contests for control. And then there were the environmental factors, those pesky climate fluctuations that love to throw a wrench in the works. The March were no strangers to El Niño events, which could turn their carefully irrigated fields into muddy swamps or barren deserts. When your power is tied to agricultural success, as was the case for the March elite, a bad harvest went beyond just empty bellies. It threatened the very fabric of their society. The pressure to maintain cosmic order and earthly power was immense, and when the rains didn't come, or came too much, the resulting chaos could unravel even the most tightly woven political tapestry. Now, you might be tempted to picture the March civilization as a house of cards, one bad storm away from collapse. But hold that thought. Recent archaeological findings suggest that the March decline wasn't a sudden implosion, but rather a slow, complex transformation. You see, the March were nothing if not resilient. They adapted, moved, and restructured as needed. Evidence from the archaeological site of Huaca de la Luna and others indicates that, while the March heartland experienced decline, northern regions saw shifts rather than abrupt collapse. It's more like a television series that loses its lead actor but keeps running, albeit with a slightly different plot. And here's where we debunk another myth, the notion that ancient civilizations were static, existing in some sort of perpetual stasis until disaster struck. The March, like any dynamic society, evolved over time. Different regions adapted in various ways to the changing political and environmental landscape. Some areas saw the rise of new leaders or cultures, while others may have been absorbed into neighboring societies. It's the ancient world's version of corporate mergers and acquisitions. So, what happened to the March? The truth, as always, is a bit messy. Environmental changes, internal conflicts, and shifting trade networks all played a part. But rather than a dramatic fall from grace, imagine a gradual metamorphosis, a society adapting to new realities, even as pieces of it faded away. It's a testament to the March's resilience and ingenuity, qualities that carried their legacy forward even as their civilization transformed. Speaking of legacy, let's reflect on what the March left behind. Their influence is woven into the very fabric of modern Peru. The March's engineering feats in irrigation laid the groundwork for future agricultural practices. Their art continues to captivate, with museums around the world showcasing their pottery as masterpieces of ancient creativity. And their political and religious innovations. They remind us that the dance of power and belief is as old as civilization itself. But perhaps the most enduring lesson from the March is one of adaptability. Faced with a challenging environment and shifting social dynamics, the March didn't just survive. They thrived, even if the shape of that thriving changed over time. It's a story with relevance today as we grapple with our own environmental challenges and political intricacies. The March teach us that while no society is immune to upheaval, the ability to adapt is what ensures continuity. As we close the book on the March, let's remember that history is a tapestry of human experience, one that's as colorful and intricate as those ancient ceramic parts. The March remind us that beneath every ruin lies a story of human resilience, creativity, and transformation. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, consider this. The March may be long gone, but their spirit endures in the lessons we learn, the stories we tell, and the enduring quest for meaning in an ever-changing world.